Okay, so I used to work night shift at a small hotel, and this happened about a year ago. But I still think about it all the time because it genuinely freaked me out so bad, and I don't know what the guy's plan was or what he was trying to do. And it honestly makes me feel sick when I remember just how long he was there and that I didn't even realize he wasn't supposed to be there. The hotel was small, only 3 floors and maybe 40 rooms total. It wasn't a busy place. Usually we only had about 10 or 15 rooms filled on weeknights. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was usually really boring and quiet, which was fine with me. I would just sit behind the desk, do some paperwork, sometimes check the cameras, sometimes watch YouTube on my phone if it was really dead. The lobby wasn't big, just the desk and some couches off to the side with the TV, and then some vending machines in the corner. Behind the desk was a little office where I had a computer and a chair and a glass window so I could see the lobby while I sat in there. At night, the front doors locked automatically, so guests had to buzz in, and I would press a button to let them through. Usually nothing happened after midnight except the occasional guest coming in late. But one night, this man came in around 11, and everything about it still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. He buzzed the door and I let him in. He looked mid-40s, tall, kind of skinny, but not too skinny. He was wearing jeans and a baseball cap, carrying a backpack. He walked up to the desk and asked if we had a room for the night. I told him yes and gave him the price, and he nodded and pulled out a card. I swiped it, it went through, and I gave him a key card for room 214 on the 2nd floor. I remember he looked at me for a second too long before he left. He had this kind of blank expression, and his eyes stayed on me for maybe 3 or 4 seconds after I handed him the key. Then he turned and walked off toward the elevator. Nothing about it screamed dangerous right away, but it was enough to make me notice him. After that, I sat back in the chair and played on my phone for a while. Around midnight, I looked up and he was back in the lobby. He didn't come to the desk, he just walked past me and sat down in the lounge area with the couches. The TV wasn't on, but he just sat down facing it. I figured maybe he couldn't sleep or something. Some guests hang out in the lobby sometimes, so I didn't think too much of it. But then after half an hour, I realized he was literally just sitting there doing nothing. He wasn't on his phone or reading. He wasn't even dozing off. He was just staring straight ahead at the blank screen. I got up at one point to grab water from the vending machine, and when I walked across the lobby, I felt him turn his head and watch me the whole way. I didn't look at him directly, but I could feel his eyes on me until I was back behind the desk. It gave me this really uneasy feeling. Around 1 a.m., I was checking the reservation system on the computer because I was bored, and that's when I noticed something weird. I pulled up the occupied room list and saw that room 214 said vacant. I mumbled what the under my breath and double-checked, because I literally just checked this guy in an hour earlier. I thought maybe I made a mistake, so I looked at the check-in logs, and there was nothing for him. No name, no charge, nothing. Then I went into the transaction screen to make sure his card had gone through earlier, and it showed no payments. I remember feeling confused as hell, because I swore I swiped his card and it beeped like it worked, but there was nothing in the system at all. That's when I picked up the phone and called room 214. It rang like 10 times, but no answer. Then I checked the key card entry log, which tells you if the door to that room was open that night, and it showed nothing. No one had entered the room. That's when I realized he never even went to the room after I gave him the card. I looked over into the lounge, and there he was, still sitting there, staring at the TV that wasn't even on. I started to get this awful feeling in my chest. I sat there debating what to do. Part of me thought maybe the system just glitched, but the fact that the room had no entry log and no charge made it pretty clear he wasn't even checked in. I waited another 15 minutes just watching him. Around 1:30, I walked over and asked if everything was okay. He turned his head and looked at me with no expression, and he told me he just couldn't sleep. Then he turned back toward the TV. I nodded and went back behind my desk, but my hands were shaking. Around 2, I noticed he wasn't sitting in the lounge anymore. My stomach dropped right away because I didn't see him in the lobby at all. I scanned the area, and then I spotted him standing at the end of the hallway by the bathrooms, half hidden in the dark. He was just standing still. I kept glancing up at him, pretending to be on the computer. He stood there for a while, and then slowly walked back and sat in the lounge again like nothing happened. I called my manager at home and explained what was going on. She sounded tired and told me to just keep an eye on him and call the police if he did anything threatening. I remember hanging up and thinking that it already felt threatening, but I didn't know what else to do. I checked the security cameras after that. I saw him on the first floor hallway camera. He walked all the way down the hall, stopped at the end, stood there for several minutes, then walked back. Later he went into the stairwell and stayed in there for about 10 minutes. I don't know what he was doing in there. Every time I looked up from the computer, he was somewhere else, near the vending machines or by the elevators. Once just standing near the corner of the lobby where the light didn't hit well. He was always staring. By 3:30, I couldn't take it anymore, so I called the non-emergency police line and explained that there was a man in the hotel who I didn't think was a guest. They said they'd send someone. While I was waiting, I noticed he moved again, this time closer to the desk. He was standing maybe 15 feet away, just watching me. He didn't blink much, and he definitely didn't speak. He just stared like he had a staring problem. I pretended to type something on the computer, but I was so scared I could hardly breathe. At around 3:50, the buzzer went off, and I thought maybe it was the cops already, but it was just another guest coming back late. I let him in quickly, and the man turned his head and watched the guest walk past. I noticed his eyes follow him the whole way across the lobby. That scared me even more, because it was like he was studying him. A few minutes later, the man disappeared again. I checked the cameras and saw him standing outside one of the guest room doors on the first floor, like he was literally just standing there. So that's when I called actual 911. I told them he was outside a guest's room and I didn't know what he was trying to do. They said officers were on the way. I kept my eyes glued on the camera feed, and he just stood at the door for about 3 minutes, then slowly walked back to the lobby. When he came back, he walked right up to the desk this time and leaned over the counter. He looked at me and asked if there was any food. His voice was so low it was disturbing. I told him there were vending machines in the corner. He gave a small smile, then walked away. I just sat there staring at the clock, begging the cops to get there. Finally, around 4:10, 2 officers showed up. I let them in and pointed right at him. He was back in the lounge, sitting down. They walked over and talked to him for a few minutes. They asked for his ID and asked him questions I couldn't hear. Then they walked him out. One of the officers came back and explained that the guy wasn't a guest at all. The credit card he gave me was stolen, and he had no bags or reservation. He had just been pretending so he could get access to the building. They charged him with trespassing and the stolen card. After they left, I sat there shaking until my shift was over. Every time I looked at the cameras, I expected to see him again. The part that messed me up the most was realizing he had been inside the hotel for hours, wandering around and standing outside guest rooms, watching me from different spots, and he was never even supposed to be there. I have no idea what his plan was, but I know it wasn't good. That was the scariest night of my life. My name is Meredith. I'm 24, and I work the night shift at a tiny gas station off County Road 11. It's the kind of place most people don't even notice unless they're out of gas or completely lost. I took the job because it was quiet and predictable. I liked that, or at least I used to. It started on a Thursday night around 1 a.m. The air outside was wet and still, and the hum of the overhead lights had been getting under my skin all shift. I was just about to microwave a cinnamon roll I didn't even really want when the door chimed. A man walked in, mid-40s, maybe older. He had a green coat, messy hair, and dry lips like he hadn't smiled in years. He didn't head for the coffee or chips like most people. He just stood near the counter, staring at me with a strange kind of familiarity. "Hi," I said, forcing a polite smile. Then the man said, "You always work this late?" I blinked and said, yeah, mostly." He smiled. Then he said, "I figured. I've passed through a few times. Noticed it's always you." That unsettled me more than I let show. "Oh yeah, right, small town," I said. He didn't leave. "Meredith, right?" I froze. I wasn't wearing a name tag. I was about to ask him how he knew, but he followed it with saying that I have nice handwriting, and he motioned to the whiteboard where I had written cinnamon coffee is back. Most people dot their I's like circles. You use little slashes. It's very specific, thoughtful. I didn't respond. He didn't buy anything, just stood there for another minute watching me, like he was studying my reactions. Then he finally nodded. "I'm Paul," he said. "Just curious, that's all." And then he walked out into the fog. After that, he started showing up randomly. Not every night, not enough to scream stalker out loud, but often enough that I stopped assuming it was a coincidence. Sometimes he'd come inside, sometimes he'd just sit in his car near the edge of the lot with his headlights off. One night, I tried to ignore him. He came in, bought a bottle of water, and lingered like always. "You're quieter tonight," he said. "Long shift," I muttered. He slowly looked around the store, like he was taking inventory of everything. "It must get lonely, just you out here in the dark, no one else for miles," he said. "I'm fine," I replied. He leaned on the counter. "You ever get scared, being a woman alone at night?" His voice wasn't threatening, that's what made it worse. It was curious, like neutral, like he was asking about the weather. I stepped back, and I asked, "Do you need anything else?" He tilted his head. "You always keep the door to the back room locked. Smart. I noticed you check it around 2 a.m. almost every night." My stomach turned. I didn't answer. "I'll let you get back to it," he said, with a soft, almost apologetic smile. "Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Then he walked out again. After that night, I started walking to my car with my keys between my fingers. I kept a tire iron under the counter. I changed the curtains in my apartment, started showering with the bathroom door locked even when no one else was home. There were nights he didn't come. Sometimes I'd go a whole week without seeing him, but it didn't help. It actually made it worse, because I never knew when he'd reappear. Like the time I came back from my 10-minute break to find a Polaroid on the counter. It was me, refilling the windshield washer bin behind the station. It was taken from that night, close up, way too close. There was no note along with it, but the slash dot on the word I and the word windshield on the bin label had been circled in red ink. The next time he came in, I told him to leave. I told him if he stayed, I'd call the police. Paul just nodded. "I get it. I've been too forward." "You've been following me," I said, with my voice cracking, and I hated that it did. "I just think you're the kind of person who's used to being misunderstood. I thought maybe you'd appreciate someone who pays attention," he said. "That's not paying attention. That's obsession," I replied. He didn't flinch. Would it be easier if I wore a smile and brought a soda every night? Would I be more normal if I just talked about sports and pretended I didn't notice the way your shoes are always a half size too big, or how your left eyelid twitches when you're tired? By this point, I was already dialing 911. He didn't stop me. The police came quickly, and he didn't resist. He just stood there, arms at his sides, waiting. They searched his car and found a notepad filled with dates and times. It was my schedule. Notes about my walk, my clothes, my groceries. One page just had my name written over and over again in tighter and tighter loops until it turned into scribbles. He kept telling the cops the same thing. "I just noticed things. I'm just a curious guy." The restraining order went through that week. Now I don't work nights anymore. I don't even live in the same town. The company transferred me to another station 2 hours away. But even now, when I drive home and see headlights behind me for too long, I feel the back of my neck tingle. And sometimes, I still think about the way he said my name, like he already knew what it would sound like in his mouth, like he'd been practicing it. I want to start this off by saying at the time I'm writing this happened to me just last night. I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I've been working there just shy of 2 months. I work the weekend shifts, which is Thursday through Saturday, while another coworker, who I'll call Max for privacy reasons, works the weekdays of Sunday through Wednesday. My coworker Max and a friend of his I'll call Ben had come into the station at about 2:30 a.m. to get some coffee and say hi. Max and his friend had taken some magic mushrooms a couple hours before they came in, so when I saw them, they were all giggly and shit. Honestly, it was pure entertainment for me. As we were talking about random stuff, Ben had made the comments about how there was a car parked in the parking lot with its lights off but running, with someone inside that had been there before they pulled in. He said when he questioned the guy said he was waiting for a DoorDash order. Normally that wasn't out of the ordinary for DoorDashers to wait in their car while we packed an order up. What was odd was I hadn't received an order in almost 2 hours. I spent most of the night in the back of the store cleaning, away from the tills and the front doors, so I couldn't even see the parking lot. We waved it off as nothing, and the two guys went outside to smoke a cigar and play with Max's dog, who they brought along. At first, I didn't think much of it, but once I was alone, I thought it was a little weird considering I didn't know how long they'd been out there before my coworker came in. Fast forward about an hour, and they came back in to get more coffee. It was at that point Max told me more about how the car had been out there parked in a spot that even when I went to the register, I couldn't see it due to the wall. He told me that the entire hour they were out there playing with his dog and smoking in the parking lot, the man in the car had switched between watching them and looking like he was texting someone on his phone. When Ben had noticed this, in his high as hell state, he walked over to the car and asked, "What's up? Why are you looking at us?" At that point, the man had tried to pretend he didn't speak any English. When that didn't work, he switched to English and started saying he must have had the wrong address before hightailing it out of the parking lot. He was definitely higher than Max at that point, but what made it really creepy was Max said that the car looked brand new and had no license plate. He also noticed there was a pile of blankets in the back, enough to hide someone under. And when the man was confronted, another car had just pulled into the lot with its lights off, a car that also looked brand new and had no license plates. And as soon as the first car had started driving away, the car that had just pulled in immediately followed them out. Max had stayed another 15 minutes before they headed out and told me to be careful and to keep an eye out. At about 6 a.m., he came back in for more coffee, and he was definitely sober, so we talked more about it. He said the guy was acting super suspicious the entire time they were out there, constantly checking his phone and watching them along with the entrance to the parking lot and the doors to the store. Even he admitted that he was freaked out, and once he came down from his high, he wanted to check on me to make sure I was all right. We both decided that had they not been there, this whole scenario could have gone one of several ways. I don't know if it was a pure coincidence, or if those two cars were planning on doing something to me as soon as Max and Ben had left and I was alone. I may carry a knife on my person for protection, but my gut tells me that from what they described, that if there were multiple people, it might not have been any good. And if they hadn't been there just playing like kids in the parking lot, something terrible just might have happened to me. I work again tonight, and I'll update if anything happens during my shift. I really wish I didn't have an update for you, but I do. The car came back again during my shift. This is how it happened. It was about 3 a.m., and I was mopping the floors when 4 guys came in to get coffee and some snacks. I was ringing them up when one of them asked if I knew anything about the car that was at the far end of the parking lot, running with its lights off. I looked at the man and asked, "What car?" He then went on to tell me there was what looked like a brand new Subaru with no license plates running with what looked like 2 guys arguing in the front seats. I could feel my heart drop into my stomach when he said this. I told the group that a car with that same description had been sitting in the parking lot the night before, but there was only one guy in it, who I assumed to be the leader of this group, told me as they were pumping gas, they noticed the car as it had been there when they pulled in, and how it just sat there as they filled up their truck. He told me as they were walking to the doors, they passed the car, since they were at the pump farthest from the doors. He said that as they passed, they could hear a guy not quite yelling, but talking pretty loud and pointing towards the doors of the store. As they passed, one of the guys started to walk towards the car to ask if everything was okay. When the guys in the car finally noticed them, they proceeded to put the car in reverse and drive away. I told them that I believed that was the same car from the night before that had been acting suspicious when there were others in the parking lot, and when confronted, he seemed panicked before leaving with another car following him out. They seemed alarmed and offered to stay with me for a bit to make sure they didn't come back. I asked if they were sure, and when they told me it was no problem, they hung around for about 20 minutes before we all decided I was probably in the clear. I thanked them again and let them top off their coffee for free before they headed out, and I was left alone. Nothing else happened the rest of my shift, but I sure as hell kept an eye out when I eventually had to go outside to change the trash at the gas pumps. What's scariest to me is not once did I see this car, but had multiple people warn me about it. At first, I was hoping I was just paranoid and it was really nothing, but to have the same car come 2 nights in a row, at almost the same time, and park in a spot that couldn't be seen from the register or the front windows, makes me wonder if my paranoia is justified. If it is, I'm just glad I had another group of people show up so I wasn't alone if those guys in the car had decided to come in. Thankfully, I don't work for the next few days, and I can only hope when I work again, the car doesn't show up. My name is Daniel. I'm 29, and I work the overnight shift at a small rural motel. It's not a chain, just a family-owned place with 2 floors and maybe 25 rooms in total. I usually work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The motel doesn't get much traffic at night, maybe a couple check-ins after midnight if someone is traveling through, but most of the time it's dead quiet. That's why I took the job. I'm not really a people person, so sitting in an empty building most nights works for me. The way it's set up is there's a main office with the front desk, some chairs, a coffee machine, and a little rack of brochures. Behind the desk is a hallway that leads to a back office. That back office is kind of like a lounge. It has another desk, a couch, a mini fridge, and a TV mounted on the wall. The cool thing is that there's a little speaker back there that dings whenever someone rings the bell at the front desk. So normally I just sit in the back, watch something on my laptop, maybe nap on the couch, and then when I hear the bell, I get up and walk to the front. I've worked there long enough to know the regular rhythm of the place. The building creaks sometimes, the heater makes a clicking noise, and the front door buzzes when a guest uses their keycard after hours. Those are all normal sounds. But the thing about working the night shift is even the normal stuff can get under your skin if you think too much about it. And sometimes, the things that seem normal at first turn out not to be. This happened on a Tuesday night back in fall. It was cold outside, maybe in the 40s, and the parking lot was empty except for 4 or 5 cars belonging to guests. It was about 2 a.m. when I first heard the bell. I stood up from the couch in the back and went into the main office. When I got there, nobody was standing at the desk. The lobby was empty. I looked outside through the glass doors, but the road was dark and seemingly empty as well. There were no cars pulling in or headlights or anything. I thought maybe I had imagined it, but the bell is loud and clear, so I knew I hadn't. I stood there for a minute, waiting to see if anyone came in late, but no one did. So I went back to the lounge. I sat on the couch, pulled out my phone, and scrolled for a while. Not even 10 minutes later, the bell rang again. I jumped up and walked quickly into the main office, but once again it was empty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up this time. I went to the doors and stepped outside. The parking lot looked the same as before. The cars were all parked with their lights off and there was no movement anywhere. The road was completely empty too. I walked to the edge of the sidewalk and looked both ways, but there wasn't a single sign of life out there. I went back inside and sat behind the front desk this time instead of going to the back. I figured maybe some drunk person was messing with me, a ding-dong ditch of sorts. Maybe a guest's kid thought it was funny, but after sitting there for 15 minutes with nothing happening, I started to relax again. I leaned back in the chair, opened my laptop, and figured it was just one of those weird things I'd laugh about later. Then the bell rang again. I snapped my head up so fast that it hurt. The lobby was still empty, nobody in sight. My skin started to crawl. I stood up and walked around the front desk to make sure nobody was hiding, but there was no one. I checked the bathrooms of the lobby. I even stepped outside again. Nothing. I walked the lot a little, shining my phone flashlight, but it was just dead quiet. I went back inside, and that's when I decided to try something different. Instead of going back to the lounge, I sat down in the chair right behind the front desk. If someone was sneaking around and ringing the bell just to mess with me, I wanted to be there to catch them. I turned the lobby lights down a little so the room was dim, and I just sat there listening. It was so quiet that every little sound made me twitch. The clock ticking on the wall sounded louder than usual. The fridge in the back office clicked on and hummed. Every couple of minutes, the building creaked as it settled. I sat there with my arms crossed, staring at the bell on the counter. 15 minutes passed, then 20. My eyes started to get heavy, and I thought maybe the person had given up. I even started thinking I just imagined the whole thing. Just as I was letting myself relax and doze off, it happened. The bell rang, only this time I saw what was doing it. A pale hand came up from under the front desk, reaching over the counter and pressing the bell right in front of me. I jumped up so fast I'm sure the chair almost fell over, and I bolted down the hall into the back office. I slammed the door and locked it, and I stood there in the dark, my chest pounding. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how someone could even be under there. The desk doesn't have much space underneath, but it's enough for someone to crouch if they squeezed in. That meant they'd been hiding just a few feet away from me, waiting. I forced myself to look at the security monitors. There were 4 cameras, one on the lobby, one on the hallway, and 2 on the parking lot. On the lobby feed, I saw the chair I had apparently tipped over in my rush. The counter looked empty. Then in the bottom corner of the frame, I saw movement. A head poked out from behind the desk. I couldn't make out details, just the outline and the glint of eyes staring straight into the camera. I backed away from the monitor. I couldn't look at it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone had broken in and was hiding in the lobby. She told me to stay where I was and that officers were on the way. While I was on the phone, I watched the monitor. The person's head disappeared, and then I saw the person crawl out from behind the desk on hands and knees. He crawled to the door and then stood up. He was tall and wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled tight, and his posture was hunched over. Then he turned around and started walking around the lobby like he was looking for something, and then he turned and walked out of the camera frame toward the hallway that led to the back office. I pressed my back against the locked door. A moment later, the knob rattled. Just once, a very slow rattle, and then nothing. The dispatcher kept asking if I was safe, but I couldn't even answer for a few seconds because my throat felt like it was closing up. After what felt like forever, I heard slow footsteps moving away. I rushed back to the monitor. The man was pacing around the lobby again. At one point, he stood in front of the glass doors and just stared outside like he was waiting for someone. Then he walked over to the brochure rack and started flipping through the papers, as if he were sarcastically killing time. Minutes dragged by. Finally, I saw flashing blue and red lights through the parking lot cameras. The cops pulled up. 2 cars. The man must have seen it too, because he suddenly bolted out of frame. A second later, I heard the front doors open. When the officers cleared the building, they found a large rock near the front door that was presumably used to prop the front door open, but they didn't find him inside. He was gone. They searched the lot, checked the road, and the officer told me whoever it was must have slipped out as soon as they pulled up. I kept replaying it in my head after. The way that hand just came up from under the desk and pressed the bell, calm as anything. Now every time I hear that bell at night, I think of that night and experience. I don't think I'll ever look at that desk the same way again. I matched with this woman on Bumble last spring, and to this day, I still don't know who I actually met that night. Her name on the app was Rachel. She looked normal in her pictures, nothing crazy or overly edited, just a cute brunette who worked in marketing and liked hiking. We talked for a few days, and she seemed down to earth. No weird messages or vibes. She didn't push for anything, and she actually wanted to go slow. Honestly, it felt refreshing compared to the other matches. After about a week of talking, we agreed to meet up for dinner on a Wednesday night. She picked a restaurant in a quiet part of town, a little nicer than the places I usually go, but nothing too crazy. When I got there, I texted her that I parked. She didn't answer. I waited at the entrance, checking my phone every couple minutes. 10 minutes went by, then 20. I thought maybe she got stuck in traffic. I messaged again, saying I was inside by the hostess stand. I started getting a little embarrassed. It looked like I was getting stood up. The hostess asked if I wanted a table, and I told her I was waiting for someone. She told me no one under the name Rachel had checked in. Now 30 minutes passed, and I was about to leave, when a guy came in and walked straight up to me. He was maybe mid-40s, scruffy, kind of heavy, wearing a black hoodie. He asked me if I was Jake. My name wasn't on the reservation, so it caught me off guard. I told him yes, and he said he was Rachel's brother. He told me Rachel wasn't feeling well, but she still wanted to meet me, and she asked him to pick me up and bring me to their place since it was really close and she didn't want to cancel. The whole thing already sounded weird, and I asked why she didn't text me that. He said she tried, but her phone died, and she didn't really want to bail on our date. His tone was calm and polite, and he didn't seem aggressive or anything, but this was just a little off. I asked where she lived, and he said just a few blocks over, and that driving would be easier because the sidewalks were icy. I stood there debating it. A part of me felt like a jerk if I refused, like maybe she really was sick and embarrassed. But the other part of me felt like nothing about this was normal. I told him I was fine walking. I asked for the address. He said it would be better if he showed me. That's when something in my stomach told me not to go. I told him I'd rather reschedule, and I started walking toward the door. He stepped in front of me. Not aggressively, but just enough to block my path. He said Rachel would be upset and that she specifically asked him to bring me. I told him I'd text her later. He stared at me for a few seconds, then stepped aside and said, "Have a good night," in a tone that sounded more like a warning than anything else. I left the restaurant fast and got into my car. I locked the doors immediately. As I pulled out of the parking space, I saw him standing outside the restaurant watching me. I drove away thinking that was the end of it, and maybe it was just some weird misunderstanding. Later that night, around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message on Bumble from Rachel's profile. It said, "Why didn't you come?" I replied that her brother came to the restaurant and told me she was sick. She answered instantly, saying she didn't have a brother. All I could think was, what? I told her exactly what happened, and she stopped responding. I figured maybe she was freaked out too. I tried to sleep after that, but around 1 a.m., I got a notification that someone was trying to log into my email, then my bank app, and then my Instagram, all within minutes of each other. I changed my passwords and turned on every security feature I could. I didn't quite connect it to Rachel's situation at first. The next morning, I checked Bumble to see if she had replied, but her profile was gone, completely deleted. Around noon, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "You should have come with me." I showed the text to my roommate, and he told me to block the number and report it. I blocked it, but the messages didn't stop. New numbers kept texting me, different area codes. Each message was something short and vague, like, "We saw you, next time don't waste my time," and "You made it harder for yourself." At one point, a message came through that used my full name, not the name I used on Bumble, my real legal name. I didn't answer any of them. That night, while I was home alone, someone knocked on my apartment door. I was on the couch, and I could not move. After a minute of silence, there was another knock, harder this time. I thought about calling the police, but it had only been 2 knocks, and I didn't want to sound paranoid. I looked through the peephole. No one was there. The hallway was empty. I stepped back and waited. After a few seconds, I heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. The next day, I called the restaurant and asked if anyone matching that guy's description had a reservation or had checked in around the time I was there. They said no. I asked if anyone had been standing around outside looking in, maybe waiting for someone. The hostess told me one of their servers actually mentioned a man in a hoodie pacing back and forth outside for almost an hour before I arrived. She said they thought he was waiting for someone, but he never went inside until he walked directly up to me. I didn't tell her the rest. I felt sick thinking how long he had been watching the entrance. I reached out to the local police and gave them the number that had texted me first. They weren't able to trace it to anyone, and since no crime had technically been committed, according to them, they couldn't do much. I deleted Bumble, I changed my phone number, and I changed all my passwords. Things were quiet for about a week. Then, one night when I was taking the trash out behind my apartment building, I found a folded piece of paper shoved under the handle of the dumpster. It had my name on it. I opened it. Inside was a printed photo of me from the night of the supposed date. Me standing inside the restaurant lobby looking at my phone. The angle was from outside the window. Someone had watched me the entire time. On the back of the photo, it said, "You." I couldn't sleep for days. I started staying at friends' houses. Every little sound made my heart jump. A few days later, I checked the dumpster again and found nothing. I became really hyper-aware of my surroundings. Eventually, the messages and everything stopped. Or maybe they just stopped showing themselves to me. Maybe they were still watching. The only thing I know is that the person I met that night was not Rachel's brother, because Rachel didn't exist. Someone made the entire profile from scratch. Someone created her just to lure somebody somewhere. Someone was expecting me to leave that restaurant with them. And the worst part is that I still don't know who he was. I have not been on a dating app since. I feel like I was supposed to disappear that night, and the only reason I didn't was because I trusted my gut at the last second. After turning 30 years old back in January, I started getting sick of being single. I hadn't been in a real relationship in several years, and I wanted to get back out there. I had always resisted online dating, but I eventually decided to bite the bullet and download the dating app Hinge. After a few days of using the app, I did end up with several matches, but none of them ever amounted to anything. One Monday night, I was chilling at home watching hockey when I got a phone notification from Hinge, saying that I had matched with a girl named Rebecca. Her profile looked legit. She had a photo of herself at her job, a short video of her and her friends at a bar shooting darts, a picture of her at an outdoor concert, and a regular selfie of just her face. I thought she was very attractive, so I messaged her. Before long, we were having a nice conversation about our respective jobs and hobbies. She seemed cool and normal, so I asked her if she wanted to meet at a local arcade bar that Friday. She took a while to respond, something like 4 hours. At about 1 a.m., she finally got back to me and agreed to the date. After our plans were set, I didn't hear from her at all for 4 days, until literally 30 minutes before our date. She sent a text that just said, "On my way," at our agreed upon time. I pulled up to the bar and was immediately surprised by how slow the place looked. This was a Friday at 8 p.m., and this bar only had 2 cars in their parking lot. I pulled into a spot right by the front sign of the bar. Mere seconds after I put my car in park, I got a text from Rebecca saying that she was having car trouble and that she was parking on the other side of the bar. This immediately struck me as super suspicious, since the other side of the bar was nothing but a few dumpsters and a fence that separated the bar from the woods. It didn't make any sense how she would even end up back there. I tried calling her, but after one ring it went to voicemail. I hung up and immediately received another text from her that said, "Please just come around back and help with my car." Alarms were going off in my head, but I wasn't immediately sure what to do. I sent her a text that just said, "This doesn't feel right, I'm leaving." I know that sounds a little dumb in retrospect, but I was seriously unsure of how to handle the situation. After sending her the text, I put my car in reverse and started leaving the parking lot. As soon as I was about to turn off the lot, 2 men in ski masks came running out from behind the bar straight towards my car. They didn't appear to be holding any kind of weapon, but I was definitely not going to wait around any longer to find out. I sped off all the way back to my apartment. Once I got back home, I noticed that there was a big dent on the top of my car's trunk, as if one of the guys had thrown a large rock at my car as I was speeding off. I didn't even notice a heavy object hitting my car, that's how scared I was in the moment. I called the police and told them the whole story, but at the end of the day, there wasn't much they could really do. They said they would keep me posted if any leads came up, whatever that means, but I haven't heard back from them. Weirdly, this didn't totally scare me off dating apps, since I figured the odds of that happening again are very slim. Still, I'm much more careful about meeting people off of them, and I make sure to call or FaceTime women before meeting them. I still remember that stretch of 2024 like it was yesterday. Humid city nights, cramped condo living, and the constant hum of anxiety sitting in my chest because the board exam was only a few months away. I was staying in a small condominium in the city with my 3 friends. All of us were buried in review materials, practice exams, and the occasional emotional breakdown disguised as a coffee break. And like every other stressed out 20-something stuck between obligation and burnout, I thought it would be a great idea to distract myself with someone new. That's when I met him. Let's call him Michael. I don't know if it was the boredom, the loneliness, or just the fact that I was tired of thinking about formulas, but I found him attractive right away. He was charming in the beginning. Calm, funny, the type of guy who replied fast, but not too fast. It was as if he mastered the perfect balance of interest and chill. We started talking every day, and then every night. And before I could fully process what I was doing, we were dating, or at least something that felt like dating. Michael was, at first, everything a sane person would want. Respectful, attentive, a good conversationalist. We would be on calls for hours while I lay on my thin condo mattress, staring at the ceiling and listening to his voice fill the room. The only weird thing was that he never showed his face during our calls. He claimed his phone had been stolen and the laptop he was using didn't have a functioning camera. I didn't question it at first, but slowly, little red flags began popping up like notifications I kept swiping away. The biggest one? The way his tone changed whenever the topic got even remotely intimate. Out of nowhere, this man would ask me for explicit selfies every single time. I shut it down firmly every time. I wasn't comfortable with that, especially online. I told him that straight, but it was like talking to a dog in heat. No, scratch that. A dog in heat at least has the excuse of being an animal. This guy, he was worse, because he knew exactly what he was doing. We'd argue about it, a lot. He'd push, I'd refuse, and he'd sulk. Sometimes he'd apologize, sometimes he'd respect my boundaries, only to ask again the next day like we didn't just fight about the same thing. The cycle became exhausting, and yet, despite all of that, I still wanted to meet him in person, to see if this connection was real, or if I was just romanticizing a voice on the other end of a screen. But every time, and I mean every time I suggested meeting up, he had an excuse. He had errands, he was busy, he didn't feel well, his schedule was full, he wasn't in the city, he had a family thing, he had an emergency, or the classic, soon. It was always soon, but soon never came. And somewhere between the late night calls, the excuses, the constant sexual pressure, and the growing pit in my stomach, something in me began to shift. Something wasn't right with Michael, and I felt it, long before I admitted it. My friends had been warning me for weeks. Every time Michael dodged a meetup, every time he gave some vague excuse about his broken camera, every time he pushed for explicit photos but refused to show so much as half his face, my friends would exchange looks. Does he not show himself on video call at all? One of them asked one night while we were reviewing in the living room. Not even a quick flash of his face? Another added. I shrugged. His phone got stolen, I reminded them for maybe the 10th time that month, and his laptop camera is broken. They stared at me like I had just announced I believed in unicorns. Marie, come on, one of them said gently. If he really wanted to see you, he would find a way. Even a 10-year-old laptop has a camera. Something's off. I knew they were right. Deep down, I felt it too. But I kept defending him. I kept telling myself he wouldn't call me every day if he wasn't serious. I kept insisting he was just going through something personal. I kept believing the version of the person he pretended to be. Then came December, weeks before Christmas, with that stupid mix of hope and denial swirling in my chest. I finally told him, come over, meet my family, spend Christmas with us. He sounded thrilled. He said yes instantly, no hesitation or excuses. For the first time, I let myself believe that maybe everything would pay off in the end. I pictured a sweet Christmas morning introduction, a cheesy meet my boyfriend moment, a fresh start, maybe even something real. But the day before our meetup, everything shattered. I remember sitting on the condo couch reviewing flashcards when he called me. His breathing was shaky and uneven. At first I thought he was just stressed. Then I realized he was crying. "Can we talk?" he whispered. Something in me went cold. It took a while for him to choke it out, but when he finally did, the words hit me like a punch straight to the stomach. "I'm a catfish." My heart dropped. He confessed everything. The photos, fake, taken from an Indonesian influencer he'd been pretending to be. His name, fake. His work, fake. His nationality, he lied about everything. My head was spinning so hard, I thought I would throw up. I felt my skin crawl, and my face drain of color. It was like he peeled off a mask I didn't even know he was wearing. And then, because apparently the universe wanted the moment to be even worse, he sent me a picture of his real face. He claimed he didn't lie about being 24, but honestly, I've seen uncles in their late 30s who looked younger than him. In that moment, my brain connected all the dots. The way he pushed for explicit photos, the way he'd get sulky and aggressive when I refused, the way he'd avoid meeting up. Knowing what he really looked like, what he really was, made all his past behavior 10 times more uncomfortable. When I told him I wanted to break up, he snapped. He said, "So you're just like the other girls. You only liked me because of the pictures of the guy I used. You never cared about me. You're no different." I was stunned. He lied to me, deceived me, manipulated me, yet somehow I became the villain. He ranted and I cried. He blamed me, then he apologized, and then he begged. He guilt-tripped, like a full cycle of emotional manipulation condensed into 30 minutes. And then came the most unhinged part of it all. He said, "Please just let me stay with your family on Christmas. I already told my parents I won't be home. I have nowhere else to go." I stared at my phone in disbelief. Absolutely not. I muted him. I ignored every message, blocked the numbers, refused to let his chaos bleed into my holiday. And I had a peaceful Christmas with my family, the kind of Christmas I needed. But if things had truly ended there, I wouldn't be writing this. Because Michael didn't stay gone. He didn't accept the breakup. He didn't disappear quietly. And the worst part was still coming. For almost a year, life felt normal again. I focused on myself, my hobbies, and my friends. I became active on Instagram again, something I had stopped doing while dealing with the emotional fallout of Michael's lies. I started posting selfies, little life updates, even some cosplay photos I was proud of. It felt good to exist online without feeling watched. But the one thing I forgot? Michael and I still followed each other. It didn't even cross my mind until it was too late. One night, after posting a few stories, nothing dramatic, just a selfie and a behind the scenes of a new cosplay, I got a notification. One message request, Michael. He replied to my story, "Hey, how have you been?" Just reading his name made something cold crawl up my spine. I didn't open the message. I didn't even breathe for a second. I just locked my phone and tossed it aside, like the words would burn me if I looked at them for too long. I tried to ignore it, but the notifications kept coming. Every few hours, another message. Eventually, I got so sick of it. I opened our chat, and the moment I did, my entire body went cold. Because sitting there, sent just minutes earlier, was a photo of the front of our house. My parents weren't home. I felt like the air was being sucked out of my lungs. My fingers moved on instinct. I locked all the doors in the house, ran upstairs, shut my bedroom door, and locked that too. Then I called the police. While I was on the phone, trying to speak without my voice cracking, I heard knocking. Pounding. He was outside, and yelling my name. He yelled, "Please, just open the door. We can talk." His voice was desperate and unhinged, a tone I had never heard before. I held my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. I crouched beside my bed, trying not to make a sound while the dispatcher kept me calm, step by step. "We're on the way. Don't come out. Stay on the line." It felt like hours, even though it was probably just minutes. Thankfully, we lived close to a police station. I heard footsteps outside, an officer shouting, and then finally, silence. They arrested him. When they came to the door to check on me, I finally unlocked it, still shaking. The officer who talked to me had a serious look on his face. The officer told me he was holding a knife. I had to grip the door frame to stay upright. He came to my house with a knife. I didn't know if he meant to threaten me, or hurt himself, but none of the possibilities made me feel any better. They were all terrifying. Because of that, I had no choice but to tell my parents everything, every lie he told, and every red flag I ignored. They scolded me, of course, for trusting someone online and for hiding it from them, but underneath the worry and anger, they were relieved that I was alive. My mom hugged me like I came home from war. Thinking back on the words, "he was holding a knife," still give me the chills. I've never been a big dating app guy. Maybe a little bit in college, but mostly Tinder when I was messing around. After that, I had a 4-year relationship. I didn't really know how to go out and flirt anymore. I didn't really have game anymore. So I was on Tinder for a bit, just testing the waters as a freshly single guy for a bit, and going out with my single friends a lot. But when it came time to start seriously dating again, the easy answer was of course a serious dating app. Hinge was the one everyone recommended for finding quality women looking to actually date. So I got on there, and I got a few matches in the first few days. One was a really pretty girl named Jenna. She was this short Italian-looking girl with black hair, tan skin, and she looked like she worked out. We seemed to hit it off immediately in the chat. After like 10 messages from both sides, she asked for my Instagram, saying she hates opening the Hinge app and would rather talk there. So I gave it to her, and moments later, I got a follow request from her account. Her username was JennaX1 with 3 A's or something like that. She had like 2,000 followers, she followed 200 people, and she had 2 posts. Both posts were her taking a selfie in the mirror, but she admittedly looked good. The posts got a lot of likes and comments, all thirsty looking guys by the looks of it though. She had a story up, and I clicked on it, and it was her at the gym taking a mirror selfie. Also looked good. She DM'd me right away, and we took the conversation from there. We continued talking about the same stuff we left off at, the gym, traveling, and we found that we related pretty well, and surprisingly, we agreed to meet for a spontaneous drink at a bar in town that night. She said she was in the same town as me, which was convenient, so we planned for 9 p.m. I knew the bar we were going to quite well, and I kinda knew the bartenders, so I decided to go a little early. The bar was slightly busy, but there were open bar stools at the bar, so I sat at one, seated away from people. It was like 8:50. The usual bartender came over and greeted me, and she gave me an espresso martini. I casually took some sips and DM'd Jenna that I was there, but that she can take her time. Then I went through her profile a little more. I went to her tagged pictures. There were none. I went through the comments again, and there truly was not a single comment from a female. It was all dudes. I hoped that wasn't a red flag that she got around. Then, around this time, a man sat down on the bar stool next to me and greeted me saying, "How you doing?" And I nodded with a smile. I went back to looking at my phone, but the man next to me continued to engage in conversation. He asked if I come to this bar often because he recognized me. This is when I took a closer look at him. He was maybe like 38, just slightly gray, kind of overweight, and a patchy beard that he definitely should have shaved. I didn't recognize him at all though. I told him, yeah, I come here once in a while. He then reached out his hand for a handshake and introduced himself as Rob. Oh brother, I thought to myself. I wasn't in the mood for this. But I shook his hand and introduced myself as well. Around now, the bartender came over and said, "Finally decided to get a drink, I see," to this guy. He gave a weird, subtle laugh, but that kind of made me think for a bit. Was he already here? And he just came up to the bar to talk to me? I DM'd Jenna again, saying, "Help me, this weird guy I think is hitting on me," as a joke. But I realized my previous DM to her was left unseen. I asked her if she was on her way. Then I went back to looking at her profile, and I decided to check her following list. And I realized she didn't follow a single female, only dudes. What kind of girl doesn't follow any of her girlfriends? This was weird. Was I catfished? The annoying guy to my right kept trying to talk to me. I had to tell him 1 second, please, as I tried calling Jenna through Instagram. She didn't pick up. It was past 9 o'clock, and it seemed like she was ghosting me, and I also just felt like this profile was fake now. I went to Hinge to find that her profile was gone, like I expected. Yup, I got catfished. I asked the bartender for the check, and then the Rob guy said, "Leaving already? Where are you from?" I said, "Yeah, I gotta get going." I didn't care to explain the situation to this guy. To be honest, I was kind of annoyed at how outwardly he went out of his way to talk to me. As I got the check, this guy would still keep trying to talk to me, even telling me I should stick around and that the hot chicks come around this time. I thought he was weird, and I was kind of just being short with him at this point. I may sound like a douche, but if you met the guy and experienced the way he approached, you'd have been annoyed too. As I said bye to the bartender and turned to leave, I felt a tight grip on my left wrist suddenly. I turned to see the man had his hand wrapped around my wrist. I said, "What the fuck are you doing?" loud enough for other people to notice and turn their heads. He started whispering to me and making a weird face. He said, "I'm Jenna. I'm sorry. Please don't go." I felt disgusting, like I needed to take a shower. I felt like throwing up. I felt violated. I broke free of his grip and hurried out of the bar to my car. It was a quiet drive home. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone because I was still taking it in, and it felt embarrassing. When I got home, I collapsed into bed and stared at the ceiling for a bit, just absorbing what happened. I went to Instagram to go block the Jenna account, but it appeared he already blocked me, or he disabled the Instagram account entirely. This quickly became an experience I just wanted to put behind me. I turned on the TV and just tried to move on. I'd tell people tomorrow. And after I turned off the light is the part that made me hate having a bedroom on the first floor. There was an aggressively loud bang on my window. The blinds were closed and I couldn't see to the other side. Instead of yelling "Who's there?" I decided to stay quiet. I watched the blinds in horror. And then there was a voice on the other side. A man's voice saying my name, Scott, over and over again. I refused to acknowledge it, but he knew I was in there. He could see the light of the TV. He might have followed me without me realizing. He just kept saying Scott. He had to have said it like 10 times before it stopped. I stayed in my bedroom the rest of the night, and the next morning, I lifted the blind to see this. A note on the other side of the glass, saying, "I'll be watching you." I didn't leave my apartment the rest of the weekend. I moved a few days later. Not to get too deep into backstory, nor disclose too much personal information about myself, but I'll just come right out and say it, that I've always been a reclusive person, ever since I was a young kid. I didn't have many friends at all, and I spent most of my time playing video games on the computer, or varying consoles I grew up with. As I got older, like high school, I started to get into just going on long walks exploring. I'd walk through the woods, walk through cemeteries, and then I developed an obsession with trespassing, going places I wasn't supposed to be. It started with sneaking into cemeteries at night. Then I started getting more experimental with it, like exploring abandoned hospitals and schools. When I was finally able to drive, it made accessing all these places much easier, of course. I only went with one of my few friends once or twice. Honestly, I enjoyed it more by myself. Part of my weirdness includes the fact that I don't get scared exploring abandoned places at night by myself. Or perhaps I should use past tense and say, I didn't used to get scared. How I used to find a lot of abandoned structures was simpler than you might think. I would just go on Google Earth and zoom into rural areas. Then I would look for abandoned-looking structures in unsuspecting places. I would then make a list of 5 to 10 locations of these structures and try to visit them all in one day. Sometimes they wouldn't be abandoned at all, but I eventually got pretty good at gauging which ones would be. This hobby involved a lot of walking through woods, and yes, before you ask, I did have a job. I worked a minimum wage job as a stock boy at a supermarket, so when I wasn't doing that or in school, a lot of time I was doing this. One of the places on my list one day turned out to be an abandoned little church. I had to park on a dirt road and get out of my car to walk. It was about a 10-minute walk. I'd always wear jeans and boots so that I travel faster through the woods without hurting myself. I started noticing old, rusted garbage cans and other junk scattered in the woods, indicating I must have been close. And then I saw the clearing in the distance approaching, along with the structure. And there it was, some dilapidated old church sitting in a random clearing in the woods. It had an old well right in front of the building. I walked over to it to see if it had been sealed, but surprisingly it hadn't been. I looked down, and it was so deep that it was pitch black down there. When I stopped and listened, though, I heard something down there. It was a faint clicking sound. It happens like on a rhythm, one click after 2 seconds. It didn't sound like water droplets. The best I could describe it is a stick being tapped on a stone wall. Curious, I stared down for longer than I probably should have, kind of like I was hypnotized by the sound. But eventually, I broke out of my daze and decided to go inside the church. I stepped onto the creaking wood porch, and the rotted boards gave slightly under my weight. The large double doors were ajar, not surprising. Out of all the abandoned structures I visited, unless it was a very well-known one posted frequently in subreddits, there wouldn't really be anyone boarding these places up. I pushed one door open further, which led to a loud groan that echoed through the trees. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. Light poured through the shattered, stained glass windows. Some of the pews were overturned or missing entirely. The pulpit stood crooked at the front, and behind it, an arched doorway led further into darkness. I did the usual, scanned the inside with my flashlight and took a few pictures from my archive on my digital camera. There was an eerie beauty to the decay, a holy place like a church in near ruin. It was beautiful but tragic. I walked slowly toward the back of the church where the arched doorway was. I stepped through it and found a narrow hallway that led to what looked like old storage rooms. One door was missing entirely, and the others were splintered or hanging off their hinges. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling everywhere, and then I saw at the end of the hallway was a stairway leading down into the basement. Jackpot, I thought. Like I said, I used to not let anything scare me. Nothing within reason, at least. Something about exploring abandoned basements excited me, but this time, something about that basement door hanging open leading to the darkness below made me pause. I honest to God got a slight chill, but I kept going. I started down the stairs slowly, and each step creaked so loud that I feared I'd fall through the wood. And then, I counted 7 steps until my right foot landed on one that gave way with a loud crack, and before I could react, it collapsed under me. I fell hard and landed in a pile of junk and dirt below the stairs. I fell directly on my ass and hurt my tailbone. I let out some kind of audible complaint, probably a "God damn it" or something. My flashlight flew out of my hand, so I crawled over to grab it. That was when I heard a voice. It was a higher-pitched sounding voice, either a woman or a young boy. It was saying words, but I couldn't understand any of them except for one thing. They said hello. The rest was gibberish, like someone trying to talk but didn't know how. I stood up and pointed the flashlight around. It was just an old basement. Some busted furniture, mostly cots, a dirt floor, stone walls. But then I saw a tunnel in the wall. It looked like it was dug out by hand. As I approached it, I realized the voice was coming from down there. I started walking toward it. I was being dumb, but I had to know what it was. I stepped just a couple of steps inside the tunnel and looked around. The walls were rough, not smooth. It had definitely been dug out with a shovel by hand. My flashlight started flickering, and I nearly had a heart attack. I hit it a few times, and it stayed on. Doing so made a louder noise than I anticipated, though. The voice got louder, still just gibberish with that same weird tone, but I could now confirm it was coming from deeper inside this tunnel. And then it stopped. Everything was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard a click. 2 seconds later, another click. Same rhythm and sound as the well, and the sound echoed. These clicks and the gibberish echoing voice were getting louder. My heart was now in my throat, so I turned and ran back. I reached the stairs and remembered one of the steps was broken. I found it easier to grab the sides of the stairs and pull myself up, instead of trying to hop over the broken step. My flashlight dropped, but it didn't matter. I was leaving the basement back to the light of the upstairs. I got to the top and didn't look back. I ran through the hallway, through the main room, and out the front doors. I ran past the well and stopped for a second. The clicking sound was gone. There was no noise at all. Come to think of it, it was dead silent. I didn't even hear any birds. I looked down the well one more time. Still pitch blackness. With that, I turned and ran through the woods, making it to my car much faster than I made it to the church, albeit completely out of breath. I cut the day short and didn't explore the other places on my list. This was just one of those experiences where you don't know what to think, and you just drive home in silence with the music off. I didn't give up my hobby of exploring entirely, but I took a break. I was admittedly very spooked. I hope it was just some other kids exploring in there trying to mess with people, but I don't know. When I think about it, that sounds really unlikely. This happened to me a while ago and is still stuck in my mind. Me and my friends often like to be in the outdoors. I'll refer to my friends as John and Anthony. We were bored and decided to go fishing deep in the woods near some farmland. We were chased out by a farmer and his dog. We tried to hide, but his dog found us and he threatened to call the police, even though he was already on the phone with his friend, which we found weird. Honestly, we kind of found it funny. So for whatever reason, we thought it would be a good idea to go back the next day and sneak onto the property to explore it. It was nearing about an hour before dark, and this property was huge, acres upon acres. We had to hike through some deep woods, similar to the one we had been fishing in before. Now, though we scoped it out on Google Maps, it was still easy to get lost. I remember thinking to myself that we should be out of there before dark. At first, everything seemed normal, and I wasn't getting any bad gut feelings. We were admiring the horses and petting them. I remember thinking it was weird having all this farmland and only horses. I compared it in my head to my uncle's farm, which is a lot smaller but has about 10 different types of animals, not just one. I just brushed it off and thought that maybe the owner specialized in horses. After walking through the woods, we reached the fence bordering the property. John was leading the way, I was in the middle, and Anthony was behind us. This is when we stumbled upon a rundown house with multiple trophy cars and a broken down RV. We were shocked at the discovery and snuck around some of the cars. There was also a very creepy rundown shed. It was crazy to see. I even took this video. There were multiple Porsches, Range Rovers, Ford Raptors, Bentley sports cars, Corvettes, and Ferraris. The deeper we got and the more cars we saw, we realized we probably shouldn't be seeing this, since some of the cars were parted out. We suspected it was probably a criminal ring stealing cars. After we had seen all the cars, John decided it was a good idea to explore the inside of the camper while Anthony kept lookout. I held the door open for John since he's kind of the smallest, so I thought he would be best suited to explore it. There was evidence somebody was living there, fishing rods, fresh food, bedding, and other stuff. Although the camper was run down, we understood it was somebody's home, so we got out of there. I forgot to mention there were also car tires inside. We were not there to break or destroy anything, just look around. We snuck around to the back of the property where all the cars were. There were side-by-sides, and we made the connection that they were probably used to run the property. There was also a rundown shed, and when we went inside the back of it, we caught a foul, horrible smell. We kind of just brushed it off and laughed, joking that maybe it could be a body. None of us really believed it, though. Then we heard the gate at the entrance of the property open and slam. It was about 1,000 feet away. We were heading back to the woodline because we didn't want anyone to see us, and that's when a van turned onto the street we were on. It was nearing dusk, and the headlights were on, so we sprinted through the woods, not sure if he saw us. This is when we probably should have left, but we decided to explore the other side of the property. After walking along the outskirts and hiking through more woods, there were a lot more horses, but we finally got to the main house of the property. Again, it seemed very run down. About 25 feet to the right was another camper, or at least what looked like a camper. It was massive, about 50 feet long, and probably hadn't moved in 50 years. We almost missed it because it was completely covered in vines. Right next to it was another rundown jet ski, also covered in vines. We managed to get the door open, but didn't want to make too much noise since we were so close to the main house. Even though it seemed abandoned, we wanted to be cautious, not just because we were trespassing, but because there was similar suspicious stuff on both ends of the property, which I could only assume was connected to the car stealing ring. I knew if we were caught, it would be a problem. We snuck around the house and saw what was probably the most luxurious car on the property. Although it was run down and old, it was still an amazing sports car, a Ferrari. I didn't get a picture or a video since we were still near the main house and the horses were making a lot of noise. We got sketched out on the far end of the property. There was a boat and cooler inside a fridge. John looked around the boat, and the cooler was about 15 feet into some very thick vegetation. We joked about the probability of a body being in there. At this point, the mood was still kind of jokey because we were exploring something we weren't supposed to see. When we got closer to the freezer, another terrible smell came, like the smell of death and rot. We decided to back off, assuming the worst, and didn't want to open it in case there was something we really didn't want to see in there. We got a bad vibe, and we were on our way back when Anthony started hearing things. We paused and listened with him, and we heard the noises too. I can't really describe them. I don't know if they were just normal wood noises or if everything just seemed amplified because we were paranoid. The vegetation was about head high, and there was a rock that each of us took turns standing on to get a better view of the property. When John went up there, we were still laughing and joking. Then he turned to us, looking like he had just seen a ghost. He wouldn't speak, so I decided to get on the rock and look for myself. What I saw is seared into my brain. Over the vegetation, I saw a man sitting at a table with a black cat. That wasn't the scary part. When I looked at his face, there was no hair, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, no facial features at all. You can call me crazy, but I know what I saw. We were about 50 feet away, and it felt like the man was staring at us, but we genuinely couldn't see his eyes since he had no features. There was also a woman with him who made direct eye contact with me, and that was the moment she started running in a direction to cut us off from the property. I don't know if the man's featureless face was real, or if he had white medical tape or bandages covering it. I still can't decide, but his face was pure white, and his head was very small. I still can't get it out of my head. After that, it was still dark, and we had a long hike through the woods to get back to where we came from. We felt as if we were being followed almost the whole way, and we almost took a route that was 2 miles out just to get away. There were weird noises like stomping feet, galloping, and screams. We tried to be quiet through the woods, but also tried to move quickly. We ended up making it back and made sure we weren't followed. I genuinely still don't know what that was, or if it was human, but I can't get this experience out of my head, and I know none of us will ever go back. I went to a quarry in McKinney, Texas, and I will never go back there again after what happened to me. Here is a little backstory, so this will make sense. The first time I went to this quarry, it was pretty sketchy. Me and a couple of my friends, Josh and Miles, went to this quarry for cliff jumping, since we had seen some YouTube videos of people cliff jumping at it, and we found out that it was only about a half hour away from where we lived. Both Miles and I are old enough to drive, me being 16 and Miles being 17, so we thought that it would be a really good idea to go. Once we got to the quarry, it had a really sketchy vibe to it. There was a small dirt road that led up to the quarry, which made a circle around it. To the left were these ghetto-looking white buildings, which were pretty much just white metal boxes, and to the right was the fence that surrounded the rock path that led to the quarry. We drove down this road in Miles' Jeep, and there were tons of signs saying stuff like no trespassing or warning, blasting zone. And there was even this big white piece of cardboard that read, "Trespassers will be shot on site." It's important to note that in Texas, people can legally shoot you if you're on their property, but it just doesn't really happen much. We decided to drive back to the beginning of the road where there was this gravel parking lot by an old building which looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Miles parked the car, and we all reluctantly got out of the car and began our walk to the quarry. While we were walking, a truck drove right past us, and the driver just kind of looked at us with a blank expression on his face. Honestly, it was pretty scary when the car passed us, but the fact that he didn't do anything made us think maybe they don't care too much if we're on their property. We kept on walking, and then we came to the fence where we were supposed to jump to get onto the rock path that led to the quarry. We went to the smallest cliff jumping spot first, and saw a pretty big snake swimming in the water after the first 10 minutes of being there, so we decided to wander further down the quarry where we saw a decent-sized cliff, about 35 feet. After depth checking it, we spent about an hour cliff jumping there before we got bored and moved on to the next cliff. We were at the very end of the quarry, and we were walking down a path to get to a bigger spot when we saw a black Hummer stop. The lady in the Hummer was probably in her mid-30s. She rolled down the window and yelled, "What the f*** are you doing on my property?" It honestly kind of shocked us all, and I responded with saying in an innocent voice, "What do you mean? We thought this was public property." She knew we were lying straight to her face and yelled at us some more. Then she said something that I'll never forget. She picked up her phone and said, "John, get the gun." Me, Miles, and Josh all froze. We were scared to death. She said to follow her and drove slowly down the path about 20 feet to a gate. We decided to follow her. We were all saying that we were so sorry and that we would never come back again, and she let us go after saying the cops are on their way, so you better haul ass that way before they get here, and pointed towards the dirt path that led us away from her property. We told her thank you and ran faster than any of us thought we could. Then we got in the Jeep and drove away. I wish this was the end of the story, but it isn't. A couple of months later, Miles asked me if I would ever go to the quarry again, and I reluctantly told him that if we had a bigger group together, then I would go. We got a group of 5 together and went back to the quarry in my car. I drove, and after about an hour, we arrived at a church which we would be parking at, which was about 2 minutes away from the quarry. We didn't want the lady somehow seeing our car and getting our license plate number. We walked down the dirt road that led to the quarry and passed by a few cars. One car stopped next to us, and a guy who was probably in his early 20s told us to watch out for a black Hummer. We laughed and told him the story of what happened the first time that we went to the quarry, and then we were back to walking down the dirt road. We jumped the fence that surrounded the quarry and decided we would just go to the second spot, so that we would at least be a tiny bit out of sight of the dirt road. We were at the spot for about an hour and having fun when a silver van pulls up at the end of the dirt road about 25 yards away. It wasn't the black Hummer, so we weren't running away just yet, but we were getting our stuff ready in case we had to run. It was for the most part out of our sight due to trees being in between us and the van. We waited there for about a minute and thought that the guy was just doing something in the car when we heard 2 loud gunshots really close to us. The gunshots scared us half to death. The exit of the quarry was not very close, probably about 300 yards, and about 125 yards to get on the main dirt road which led off the property. I led the way, with my friend Aiden trailing not far behind me. I heard more gunshots about 40 yards away, and it sounded like he had shot about 8 shots so far, but when I looked back, I couldn't see the guy who was shooting at us. We got to the fence and jumped it, and we were now on the main dirt road that led to the exit. Out of pure luck, the guy we had talked to earlier, who had warned us about the black Hummer, was in his white truck on the dirt road. We begged him for a ride, and he gave us a ride back to the end of the property. We thanked him and then ran back to the car. We all got in the car and drove away, never to see that quarry again. Back in 2018, my cousin Ryan and I were really into urban exploration. We had been to old factories, shuttered schools, and forgotten farmhouses that looked like they were one good windstorm away from collapsing. We were not stupid about it. We checked floors before walking on them, wearing masks where there might be asbestos, and avoided any place that seemed like it might be actively guarded. Still, there was one place we'd been talking about for months that neither of us had worked up the nerve to try. The big abandoned house on the shore of Lake Harlow. It was the kind of property you only ever saw from a distance, sitting far back from the main road behind a set of tall iron gates that had been bent inward years ago. Pines and brush had grown wild around the driveway, hiding most of the place unless you caught a glimpse through the trees while driving past. Local rumors about the place were endless. The most common story was that a wealthy family had lived there in the 90s before suddenly disappearing. People claimed they'd left in the middle of the night without taking anything. Furniture, clothes, dishes, even family photos were supposedly still inside. Theories ranged from financial ruin to witness protection to something even darker. No one had ever bought it afterward, and the property had just sat there decaying for more than 2 decades. The afternoon we went, the weather was gray and still. We parked at a hiking trailhead about a half-mile from the property, and we walked in through the woods to avoid being seen from the road. As we got closer, the roofline appeared through the trees, and I realized just how big the place really was. 3 stories with tall windows and a wide wraparound porch, all in various stages of rot. Paint peeled off in long strips like sunburnt skin, and sections of the porch sagged inward. We circled around to the back. moving quietly in case there was anyone nearby. The back door was unlocked, and the moment we stepped inside, the air changed. The air was still and smelled faintly of lake water and dust. The kitchen was the first thing we saw. It looked like a movie set frozen in time. Plates were stacked neatly on the counter, and a coffee cup with a brown ring of dried residue sat beside the sink. The cabinet stood open, showing old boxes of food that were long expired. A faded calendar on the wall still hung open to May 1997. We moved through the downstairs slowly. The living room still had furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The fireplace was still filled with crumbling ash, like the last fire had burned out decades ago. Family photos were hung in the hallway, with people smiling at barbecues and dressed up for Christmas. Honestly, I got the chills for some reason as I looked at these photos. There was something eerie about seeing cheery family photos in a long-abandoned house. Some of the photos had sun-faded so badly that their faces were almost ghostly white. Upstairs is where things started to feel off. The first bedroom we entered had a perfectly made bed, but all the dresser drawers were open and completely empty. Another room's floor was entirely covered with newspapers from 1997, each one folded open to the classified ads section. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the dates. They were all from within the same week in July, and every circled ad was for private buyers looking for quiet transactions. The master bedroom was the strangest. The heavy curtains were drawn shut, but when I pulled them back, I found the windows had been boarded over from the inside. The closet door had a rusted padlock on it, and the floor in front of it was scratched, as if someone had tried to drag something heavy out but couldn't. Ryan wanted to force it open, but I talked him out of it. We didn't have tools, and I wasn't eager to break something in a place where we weren't supposed to be. He suggested we check the basement before leaving. The basement door was in a narrow hallway off the kitchen. When we opened it, a wave of damp, cool air came up that smelled strongly of mildew. The stairs were wooden. Each step down creaked like it might give way under us. The basement was big, with thick stone walls and wooden shelves along one side. Most were empty, except for a few rusted cans and a broken lantern. But in the center of the room, illuminated in our flashlight beams, were 5 chairs, all mismatched and old, but arranged in a perfect circle. Unlike everything else in the house, they weren't dusty. The seats looked recently used. I was about to whisper something to Ryan when we both froze. Somewhere above us, a door closed. The sound was clear as day, and it was followed by footsteps crossing the floor above. We killed our lights instantly and stood in the dark, barely breathing. The footsteps paused, then started again, moving toward the hallway above the basement. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We hadn't seen any cars outside. We hadn't heard anyone else since we got here. Whoever was up there hadn't made a sound until now. The footsteps stopped again, this time directly above the basement door. Then the sound of the door handle rattling made my blood run cold. Ryan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the far end of the basement where a small ground-level window sat broken and half covered by a rotting shutter. It was barely big enough to fit through, but we didn't care. I went first, scraping my jacket on the glass, dropping down into damp dirt outside. Ryan was right behind me. We sprinted into the tree line, not daring to look back until we were well into the woods. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, I saw the basement door wide open and someone standing in it. They were too far away to make out any details, just tall and still. It looked like their head was tilted slightly, like they were watching us. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. Both of us were so disturbed that we barely even spoke on the car ride home. That night I just kept replaying it in my head. Everything from the chairs, to the footsteps, to the locked closet, and then that horrifying image of that figure on the porch. So a couple weeks later, Ryan called me and told me that after he made a post in a Facebook group asking if anyone knows about the history of that house, an older guy responded to his post saying that there have been sightings of someone in that house, and the first guess would of course be a squatter. However, that wouldn't explain the strange, almost ritualistic looking circle of chairs in the basement. At this point, it's not my problem to worry about. I'm just happy we got out of there in one piece.
was 22. I got a job in New York City. Living in Jersey, however, there was no way I'd be able to do that commute daily, so moving was a necessity. Only thing, I didn't have a lot of money yet, so when I saw an ad on Craigslist for an available bedroom in an apartment in the Hell's Kitchen area for a really low price, I jumped on it. I took a ride to the city the next day to view the apartment, and the landlord gave me a quick tour of the place. The landlord himself seemed a bit socially awkward, but that didn't really matter at all. The place did come with a catch. I'd have a roommate. The landlord said he's a very quiet, to himself kind of person, which he said was good. My roommate's name would be Bren. The landlord knocked on Bren's door, asking if he'd like to come out and say hello. Bren didn't even answer. The landlord suggested he might be taking a nap. So we moved on to talking in the living room, where I said I was interested in renting. I signed an application, and the next day, the landlord called and offered me the room. So I moved in the next week. My dad helped me unload all my furniture into my little room. Something odd to note was that never once did this Bren character come out during all this commotion to at least say hi. He was definitely home. We heard him moving around in his room. I came to the early realization that he probably wasn't going to be friendly at all. When we finished unloading the van, my dad left and I was alone, officially moved out. I sat in my bed and started watching Netflix on my laptop. Then I heard the door to Bren's room open and close. This seemed like my chance to go out and say hi. It was his first time leaving his room. I got out of my bed, but before I could even get to my bedroom door, the front door to the apartment slammed shut. I stepped outside to the living room, and no one was there. I didn't know what the deal with this Bren guy was, but surely he had to know we'd have to meet eventually. I went back to my room, ate a bowl of ramen, and went to sleep. I woke up when I heard the front door to the apartment close again. Then footsteps followed. The footsteps on the creaky wood floor made their way to the outside of my door, then stopped. I sat up and looked at the crack below the door. The outlines of feet could be seen through the light creeping in under the door. Why was he just standing out there like a creep? Of course I didn't say anything, I just waited for him to walk away. I didn't have my door locked, and I was low-key terrified of him entering my room. And thankfully, he walked away from my door and back to his room, and I heard him shut his door. I tried to go to sleep, but all night all I heard were thumps coming from his room. I had no idea what he could possibly be doing. I was tempted to go knock on his door and tell him to keep it down, but I hadn't even met the guy yet, so I had to deal with it. Eventually I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, it seemed Bren was out already, maybe at work, I didn't know at the time. I spent most of that day shopping for groceries and basic apartment necessities. When I got back, I dropped all the bags on the couch in the living room to give myself a rest. I cooked dinner, watched some Netflix on the couch. All the while, Bren never came home. I did a quick run to the nearby 7-Eleven to get toothpaste, and when I got back, I noticed Bren's door was cracked open and the light was on. So I figured this was it, the moment for me to say hello. I went to his door, knocked lightly twice, then pushed the door open. What I found in there was shocking, or maybe I should say what I didn't find in there. The room was completely empty. Not a single piece of furniture, except for a single chair sitting in the corner of the room, a kind of chair you'd find in a high school classroom. My heart suddenly started racing and I started to shake. I turned off the light in that room and shut the door. Could this Bren person have been in the process of moving out? I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed, suddenly getting a really bad headache. I took out my phone and decided to call the landlord to ask him what the hell was going on. After dialing his number, I put the phone to my ear and suddenly heard a loud ringing sound coming from my closet. I felt like my heart, which was already racing, was now in my stomach. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. I got out from the bed, ready to open the closet, but I stopped and realized that given that the phone rang twice, that means he had his phone and he declined the call. I had the sick realization that the landlord was likely in my closet, and there never even was a Bren. I ran to the bathroom, locked myself in, and called the cops. They got to the apartment shortly, and searched the whole apartment with me. Sure enough, we found the landlord hiding under my bed. I tried pressing charges for trespassing, trying to get myself out of the lease, but it turned out there never even was a lease. The dude wasn't even an actual landlord. He didn't even own the apartment. I didn't get the rest of the story, like how he got the keys in the first place. I had my dad come the next day to help me move all my stuff back home. I found another apartment the next week, and it was a huge hassle going through the whole moving process again. I knew from the start the so-called landlord gave off bad vibes, but who would have ever imagined the events that were about to take place? There was an ad on Zillow for a shared apartment near the chicken farm I worked at. I moved in because it was convenient and already furnished. I just dropped off my clothes and a mini dresser, and I already had a bed to sleep in the spare room. The man who was renting the room out to me was old. He was like 70 or something, and his name was Ben. It was a non-contractual agreement, meaning I'd pay him by the week, but he was more or less still a roommate. He was very old-fashioned, and that included everything in the house. I've never exactly come from a wealthy family, so trust me when I say this was a steal for me. One night after getting home from a long day of work, I collapsed into bed and fell asleep like a baby, but suddenly I awoke to the bedroom door opening. Light poured into the room from the hallway, and standing in the doorway was the old man, Ben, with his hand on the doorknob. He said in his deep, hoarse voice, "Stay out of the basement." He said he knew I went down there. I defended myself and assured him I didn't, because I actually didn't. He shut the door, and I heard him walk downstairs. I sat there thinking this guy must be unstable or something. The next day, I was off from work. Ben took his old jalopy down the road. I'm guessing to the store. While I was alone, I stared at the basement door. I knew it was the basement door because I'd seen him go down there before. I went to open it just to peek downstairs, but obviously it was pitch black down there. I would have never been compelled to go down there if it weren't for his bizarre remark about not going down there. But I figured he wasn't going to be home anytime soon, so I continued down. I found the light switch at the bottom step for some reason. It was for the most part a normal basement so far, but there was a door in the corner. Behind that door was something unimaginable. The door was very hard to open because there was some rubber concealer under the door, I'm guessing to keep that awful smell out of the rest of the basement and house. The inside of this little room was a nightmare. Bloodstains on the concrete floor, black bags stacked in the corner of the room, stretched long enough to be carrying bodies or body parts. And the smell of rotting life. I had to refrain from puking right there. I noticed a camera hung in the top right corner of the room, aimed down at some workbench. I took a quick picture of the room and hurried out of there. I went up to the spare bedroom, packed all of my clothes in a garbage bag, and heard the front door slam shut downstairs. He was back. I played it cool and greeted him from the upstairs hallway. He didn't respond. I heard him open the basement door and stomp downstairs. I saw that as my cue to sprint to my car. I made it to my car and without looking back, drove away from there. I drove 15 miles back to my brother's farm and showed him the picture. He said I was an idiot for not calling the sheriff sooner. So I called 911 and told them to bring a search warrant to Ben's address and check the basement before he could clear it out. I made it clear I was simply his temporary roommate or tenant living with him and came across it. A few hours later, someone from the sheriff's department came to my brother's farm asking for my ID and some other information. I complied with them. They gave me the relieving news that Ben had been arrested. He was in the process of clearing any evidence from his basement, but he wasn't quick enough. The deputies didn't go into much detail about what exactly they found in those bags or anything else, but I don't think they were allowed to. They thanked me and went on their way. My brother let me stay with him for a few weeks, till I was ready to get back out there and find another apartment. I'm not sure how many of you went to college, but for those of you who did, you most likely remember that feeling of walking into your dorm for the first time, meeting your roommate, the person you're supposed to ideally be friends with for the next 4 years. I certainly remember mine. I walked into my dorm for the first time, and there was my roommate. He had fair skin, black hair, glasses, and a slightly feminine tone in his voice. There was nothing wrong with any of that, but to me, he just immediately struck me as the gaming type, which was not exactly someone who I was going to vibe with easily. From the moment I shook his hand and he gave me a dead fish handshake, I was a little put off. I'll call him John for the purpose of this story. I left the room to go say hi to the other kids on the floor and meet as many people as possible. I instantly vibed with some of the other kids more than I did with John. Anyway, that first night consisted of a lot of unpacking and hanging around in the room. So I did try to get to know John a little bit. It wasn't that he was a mean person, it was just he didn't seem to really know how to converse. I would ask him questions about himself, and he'd give me one-word responses, or responses that barely even made sense. He even went to bed really early, shutting off his lamp at like 10 o'clock. No one had classes the next day, so I just found it odd. I put headphones in and watched videos on my phone until around 12. Then I went to sleep. The next morning, a few of the guys on my floor and I went to the dining hall together. When I got back to my room, I noticed my duffel bag was moved. I looked at John, who was sitting on his bed. Then I went to go through my bag to see if anything was missing. I couldn't find what it was, but my bag just seemed lighter. I straight up accused John of going through my bag, and he denied it with a very aggressive tone. What could I do, though? I didn't have cameras in the room, so I couldn't prove it. The next night, I tried inviting John out with me and a couple of the other kids from the floor. He didn't want to go, claiming he was trying to stay on top of his work as soon as possible. So I went out, and when I got back, John was fast asleep. It was kind of late, so I just went straight to bed too. It started to rain pretty heavy outside. A storm was in the forecast. I woke up in the middle of the night hearing thunder crashing. I was too comfortable and lazy to roll over and look outside, but even with my eyes closed, I was noticing the constant flashing from the lightning. If anything, it actually helped put me back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up, and my backpack was open and moved. I didn't accuse John this time. I decided I was going to stay up that night and wait, listen to what he was doing. So, after a long rainy day, night came, as did the time for me to hit the hay. I stayed on my phone for a long time, listening to the rain outside the window. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I flipped on my side and pretended to be asleep. I did this for a long time, and eventually I started noticing the flashes again. 2 or 3, actually. I turned to my other side and saw John sitting upright in his bed. I only caught a glimpse of him quickly putting down his arms as I flipped over. Suddenly all those flashes made sense. It wasn't lightning. It was him taking pictures of me. I played dumb and said, "What are you doing?" He stuttered and said he couldn't sleep. The next day I told the other kids on the floor about it and how weird John was overall. They said I should request a room change. I agreed with them. At whatever point I went back to the room, John was actually gone for once. I couldn't believe it. His laptop was also on his bed with the lid cracked open. I had to snoop. I was too curious. I opened the laptop, and I was on John's desktop, which was littered full of folders, programs, and images. It was the messiest desktop I've ever seen. I started opening the random pictures on his desktop. Most of them were weird, but then I got to the disturbing ones. Pictures of me. Upon opening one of them, I realized it was a picture of me in bed, taken with an iPhone with a flash. He had stored all the pictures he'd taken of me on his computer. He even had pictures of my duffel bag and the inside of my backpack. I took a video of the laptop screen, then deleted every picture I could find from his computer and closed his laptop. I went straight to the hall that dealt with dorm life and showed them the video. I requested a new roommate immediately. I don't know how John was disciplined by the school, but I was going to be given a new room across campus the next day. However, on my last night with John, I couldn't sleep at all. I heard the springs under his mattress kinking as he got up from his bed at some odd hour in the night. Then silence. Silence until I heard a short, quiet exhale come from right above my bed. He was standing over my bed. I just knew it. But I was just simply too afraid to turn around. Less than a minute later, I heard the springs under his mattress again, and the rest of the night was silence. I was out first thing in the morning. My new roommate was like a breath of fresh air, a normal guy. It's a little creepy knowing that John Kid still has all those pictures of me sleeping on his phone. I don't know what his goal with those pictures were. I don't know why he just stood over my bed like that the last night I was there. I don't know why he went through my bags. The kid was an insane creep, and I'm happy I got away from him. When I moved out from home, my dad's friend Kathy was subletting her apartment with 2 bedrooms. She said she'd give me a good deal, however I'd have to share it with some older woman she found. She was tight on money, so I understood. Kathy introduced the woman and I the day I moved in. Her name was Betty. She was like 60 years old. It felt weird knowing I'd have a roommate who could almost be my grandma. Since Kathy was subletting the apartment, it already had furniture. I just had to bring my own bed and dresser. The weirdness started on the second night. I was watching TV in the living room when Betty's head appeared from behind the wall to the hallway, and she stared at me intently. She started muttering these strange, faint noises. "Betty, you okay?" I asked. She groaned and disappeared back into the hallway. I immediately got on the phone with Kathy and asked if there was something wrong with Betty. Kathy said there was nothing wrong with her as far as she knew, though she only met her a week ago. When I told her about what Kathy just did, she was surprised. The next day I ran into Kathy cooking eggs in the kitchen. She said good morning, and I asked her if she was okay last night. She seemed confused what I was referring to, and I mentioned the way she was staring at me and making those noises. She claimed she had no recollection of it. All I could chalk it up to in my head was some kind of psychotic break. Fast forwarding through normal, unnecessary fluff, I was laying in my bed on my laptop with the light off. There was a knock at my bedroom door. I muted my laptop and heard the same moaning and groaning sounds of Betty from the night before. Quite frankly, I was uncomfortable with going out there, but this confirmed that something was definitely wrong with this woman. She kept knocking. It wouldn't stop. But the door was unlocked. If something was really wrong, I figured she'd come in. I really think the knocking and moaning went on for a full minute before I heard her walk away. It seemed these little episodes of hers would only happen at night. I almost wanted to be able to lock the door because it was kind of creepy actually, but the door had no lock. But she left, so I was okay to go to sleep now. I woke up expecting it to be like 9 a.m., but it was pitch black. I looked at my clock and it was 1:30 a.m. What I was woken up by became clear, and there was a creak in the floor in the room. I saw a figure standing at the edge of my bed in the dark. "Becky?" I said. I heard the familiar groaning sounds again. I flipped on the lamp next to my bed, and there she was. This 60-something-year-old woman, with her long graying hair all disheveled, looking like a half-awake psycho. But really, the first thing I noticed was the large knife in her hand. I screamed a horrific scream as I curled up in the corner of my bed, expecting her to attack or do something. But she just kept making her strange sounds. Then she left the room. I ran to shut the door and block it with the dresser. I tried calling Kathy, but she was obviously asleep. I had to make it through the night, and it was a long 6 hours before the sun came up. I called Kathy at 8 and explained everything. and then I told her she needed to evict Betty immediately. She couldn't believe it, but she still apologized and said she'd be over that day. Kathy came to speak to Betty. She couldn't just evict her right away without a notice, though, and the eviction process takes months. So Kathy told me it was best if I just left the apartment and found somewhere else to live while she dealt with Betty. Betty apologized and said she had no recollection of any of the stuff happening. After Kathy and I did some research, we determined Betty most likely had a severe case of sundowning syndrome, which causes people to become confused or aggressive late in the day when the sun goes down. It's really terrifying knowing in whatever confused state of mind she was in, she likely had the intention of coming into my room and stabbing me for whatever reason. I didn't go away to college, so meeting girls and overall socializing wasn't as spoon-fed to me as the kids who went away to party schools and prestigious universities. In my freshman year, I grew bored fairly quickly as my friend group had shrunken tremendously. Meeting people at what was basically a commuter college was next to impossible unless you joined clubs or sports. So my main source of meeting girls, at least, was Tinder and Bumble or Instagram. One day I got a follow request from some very attractive girl named Miranda. I could tell she was attractive just based off her profile picture. I requested to follow her back, and when she instantly accepted my request, I started to look through her pictures a bit to make sure it wasn't a catfish. Her profile seemed real. She had around 4,500 followers. She only followed a few hundred people, and all her pictures had a lot of likes and comments. And then she DM'd me, and my face lit up. She DM'd me saying she found me on Tinder and thought I was cute, which, yes, I had my Instagram username in my Tinder bio at the time. She also had photos posted dated back to beyond a year prior, so everything checked out on my catfish radar. We chatted in the DMs for a few days. When she posted a new picture, I liked it and commented on it as she asked me to. I just put down a couple fire emojis. She liked it, of course. I checked some of the other comments, and they were also from guys gassing her up, throwing her compliments left and right. Clearly I wasn't the only guy talking to her, or at least trying to. Well, one night we struck up a conversation once again, still in the DMs. I told her I had the house to myself that night and figured I'd be risky and invite her over. She seemed pretty open to it. I just tried my best to keep it as lighthearted as possible. I gave her my address just to ask her how long of a drive it would be. She said 10 minutes. I then confirmed if she was coming or not, and she replied, "Yeah, I'll come." Then she asked me how old I was, and I said 18. She replied that she was 19, but this conflicted with something that I remember she replied to one of the many other men commenting on one of her posts. His comment was something like, "Damn girl, how old are you?" And she replied 25. The guy she was responding to was some bald guy who looked to be in his 50s. This got me suspicious. I started analyzing the people who were commenting on her posts a little more, and I realized they were all guys. There were no female friends of hers commenting supportive stuff that you'd see on basically any other girl's Instagram. And most of the comments seemed to be just old, creepy dudes telling her how sexy she was. I then looked for any pictures of her with other girls, maybe some friends tagged in a picture. But no, any pictures of her with other girls in it, the girls were not tagged in, and there were no comments from any of the girls in the pictures. This was starting to scream catfish, so I blocked the account. Not long after, talking within 10 minutes, I started getting spammed with DMs from 3 random accounts. They all had profile pictures, but all of them had less than 50 followers. They all appeared to be fake, and they were DMing me threats about how I shouldn't have done that. I gave in and replied to one of them, and instantly, it replied back, "Unblock Miranda." I blocked that account as well, and went to unsend all my recent DMs to that Miranda account, specifically the one with my address in it. I counted myself lucky I didn't give the account my phone number or any other info. I also set my Instagram profile to private. After that ordeal, I ended up trying to get anyone else to come over and take advantage of having the house to myself, but eventually I gave up and went to bed. I have trouble sleeping 90% of the time, and this night was no exception. So after I'd say at least an hour and a half of trying to fall asleep, I heard noises from outside in the living room. Now this was in February, so it was freezing out and the heat was on full blast, so there were always ticking and clicking sounds from all the baseboard heaters. But a couple noises sounded a little different, like louder. I didn't go check though. And while each click and clack from around the house was making me look over into my dark room, making sure no one was there, I eventually somehow fell asleep. But not for long. I woke up and it was still dark in the room. I knew something woke me up, like how sometimes you hear a sound in your sleep and it's a delayed reaction before you wake up a few seconds later. Well, that's what happened here. I sat up in my bed, the clicking of the heater still filling the room. I looked in the far corner of my room, and at first I didn't believe what I was seeing. I looked closer and could see it better. There was a person in the corner of the room, and I swear I could see their grinning face. I was so scared in that moment, I got up from my bed, unable to even scream. I ran all the way outside into the snow in my bare feet, and I rang the neighbor's bell a million times. While in there, I basically cried to them that someone was in the house, and I used their phone to call 911. When police searched the entire house, they didn't find anyone. The back door and side door were both locked, and so were most of the windows. The only possibility of someone getting in would have been through one of the backyard windows, which was left unlocked. The police officers comforted me in letting me know that it may have just been a hallucination, which I learned through research can happen in the moments after just waking up for some people. Sleeping in the house alone the rest of the night was the most anxious thing I'd ever done after that, but I really won't ever know for sure if what I saw was really just a hallucination, or if, God forbid, whoever was running that Miranda catfish account was in my house. A few months after this incident, that account was either deleted by the user or taken down by Instagram. It no longer exists.
Instagram is my favorite time waster app. I spend a good chunk of my free time browsing it. I've gotten my fair share of creepy DMs. I've learned to ignore them. So when I got a notification from Instagram that some random account requested to DM me, I didn't sweat it. I did, however, just open the DM because I always do out of curiosity. The DM was a link to another Instagram profile named Perfect Always with a Z. I pressed the link and it opened this page with a bunch of pictures of girls, like young girls, seemingly varying in ages from 13 to 20. As I continued to scroll through the account, I picked up on an unsettling fact, that all the pictures seemed to have been taken in secret. Like one girl was on a school bus, one was sitting on a park bench, one was taken from behind a bush of a girl walking on the sidewalk, one was taken of a group of girls at a college campus. Expecting to find perverted comments on the posts, all I found were positive comments like "keep up the good work" and "nice." There were also some comments with random numbers, like 500, and that's it. And every single account that commented appeared to be spam accounts, like no profile pictures and no followers. It was a weird and creepy account, so I reported it and sent a link of it to my friend Ali. Then I went about my business. I was at school when all this happened, so I couldn't give it too much attention to begin with. It wasn't until after school when I got home that Ali finally texted back saying, "OMFG, who did that? That's crazy." I replied, "I know, it's so creepy." She seemed more concerned and shocked than I was expecting her to be. She replied saying, "You need to report that to the police right away." I replied back, "Why me? It's not exactly my problem." She replied back with nothing but question marks mixed with exclamation points. So I said, "Why are you freaking out?" She said, "Why don't you care about someone posting pictures of you on their Instagram?" My heart sank. I immediately rushed to click the link again and view the profile. This time there were 2 new photos uploaded to the page. One of a girl in the passenger seat of an SUV, and one a picture of me walking home. It was taken from inside a car parked on the side of the road. I remembered seeing that car, and I remembered noticing someone sitting in it. This just seemed unreal. I called Ali at once, freaking out. I told her why I didn't understand at first, and explained how some random account DM'd me the link. Ali told me to report it to Instagram and the police. I told her I reported it to Instagram already, and told her to do the same. I stayed locked in my room talking to Ali for at least an hour, as I was home alone. The next time I refreshed that Instagram page, it said, "This page does not exist." First thought, okay, it blocked me, so I asked Ali to refresh it as well, and it said the same thing for her. We both used our Finsta accounts to confirm that it was removed, and it was. The account no longer appeared. I still don't know if it was taken down by Instagram or if the creator of the account deactivated it. I also have no idea what those numbers in the comments meant. Either way, it seemed like one big setup thing, and I'm scared to know any other details about what was going on with that Instagram page. This situation happened in my first year of high school. I was 15 years old and lived pretty far from school, which resulted in me taking public transportation to and from there. My Instagram was set to public back then, and I never really cared much about who followed me, which, in retrospect, being a young teen, I should have. My page was pretty standard. I was visible in most of my posts, posing by myself or with a couple of my friends for the most part. I also post a lot of my story, which for those of you who don't know, allows users to share photos and videos to their story for 24 hours. In those stories, I would sometimes include a shot of me waiting for the bus or at the subway with music playing in the background. I remember posting such one day, and randomly looking at my stories and seeing who viewed them. I had around 120 views, most of them from people I knew. One account in particular stuck out. The profile pic showed an unfamiliar middle-aged man. The selfie was taken at a weird close-up angle, like those cliché parent selfies. He had seen every one of my stories posted. I didn't really think that much of it, and continued about my day. Hours later, when I was nearing sleep at around 2 a.m., I got notifications that that same man had requested to DM me, followed me, and liked all my posts. I had about 12 posts, so it wasn't a crazy amount of notifications. I opened his DM and it just said, "Hey," with a smiley face. I definitely found this crazy weird, so I didn't respond and checked his profile. His username was odd. Sam with a bunch of numbers. He only had one post, the weird angled selfie with 2 likes. I finally got a decent look at his face. He was pale and bald with dark tinted sports glasses. He seemed to be wearing a ripped white t-shirt. He had 5 followers and was following around 400 people, which mostly consisted of teenage girls, young women, and a few celebrities. Realizing what an actual creeper this guy was, I blocked him, plain and simple. In the morning, I got off the subway stop that's next to my school and took a seat on a bench in the middle of the platform to adjust my backpack. Upon doing this, I felt someone watching me. The platform was packed with people, so I thought maybe it was just my anxiety. I rose up and turned to find the now familiar middle-aged creep staring at me. His eyes were a glossy blue color, sunken and droopy. He stood a good 20 feet from me, just gawking with an angered frown. I felt a strong urge to throw up and cry at the same time. My skin prickled and my whole body filled with fear. Everything I was feeling was multiplied by 1,000 as I realized he was slowly walking towards me. No one paid him any attention. No one batted an eye. And I remember breathing hard and heavily, wishing someone would pick up on what was happening. I turned and speed walked around and past people trying to lose him. Though with each step I took back, he took 2 steps forward. He was getting a lot closer to me by the second. It was all happening so fast, and I honest to God didn't know whether to continue to run or attempt to draw attention to him. I ran into a woman with a seemingly friendly face on the stairs, and that's when I decided on the ladder. I told her that guy in white is following me. As I spoke, I heard my own voice quiver, and that's when I realized how afraid and panicked I actually was. She noticed the man I was referring to at the bottom of the steps, and right away she called him out. She told him to stop following me or she'd call the police. Her shouts made him freeze as others began to stop and take note of the situation. She stood protectively in front of me, waiting for his next move. I took the opportunity to snap a quick pic of his face, that I would later use to report him. In my head, all I thought was, he's not going to do anything with people watching me. He can't be that stupid. And I was right. He turned around and got on the next subway train. The woman walked me to my school, and on the way, I couldn't help but wonder how that man could have possibly found me. And then I remembered. I posted a story of the subway stop I got off. That realization alone made my skin crawl and taught me a very important lesson to never reveal your specific location to your public social media. After the woman walked me to my school, I thanked her and actually gave her a hug. I don't know what I would have done if she hadn't stepped in. I wasn't brave enough to say anything to the man, so frozen in fear, but that woman was, and I'm forever grateful for her. And I hope that if anyone is ever in her position, that they will step in and use their voice to help. The internet and social media can be a very dangerous thing. This personal experience of mine is a prime example of what I mean. I've had an Instagram account for like 7 years now. I used to post on it a lot more when I was younger. These days I really don't post at all, and I only open the app like once a day just to browse my friends' posts or whatever. Well, recently I lost my phone. I figured it was time for a new one anyway, though. I did try the whole find my iPhone thing, but it said my phone was like 30 miles away. It just wasn't worth it for that old phone. Moving on, one day not too long ago, I got a DM from a kid from high school that I hadn't spoken to in years. In fact, I didn't even follow him. I peeped what he DM'd me, and it was a heads up message. He was bringing it to my attention that someone was using my pictures on a fake Instagram account. He shared the profile in question with me, so I had a look and realized he was right. There was this entire account pretending to be me, just using a different name. There were pictures I'd never even posted on Instagram before on there, pictures exclusive to my old phone. My head was spinning. I actually felt sick over this. I immediately assumed whoever found my old phone somehow bypassed the password. The account had 50 followers and it was following around 150 people. The posts all got like 5 to 10 likes. Most had no comments, but some had basic comments like a flame emoji or whatever. This account was literally pretending to be me. It had a story posted, so I went to check that, and I felt even more sick to my stomach. It was a boomerang panning from my house to my car over and over, as if they were showing off both. A boomerang is basically just a looping 2-second video that goes back and forth from one point to another. This meant whoever was doing this knew where I lived, and had any other information I may have still had on that phone. The story was posted only a few hours ago. I immediately thought to go to find my iPhone settings and turn on lost mode. I regretted not doing that the second I lost that phone now. When I tracked my old phone one last time, I was in for another horrible surprise. It said the location of my old phone was right outside our house somewhere. There's a lot of space between houses in our gated community, so there was no mistaking that person was still out there on the property somewhere. I turned on lost mode on the old phone and ran downstairs to get my roommate Corey's attention. It seemed he was already occupied though by his husky barking at something in the backyard. Corey was standing by the door watching his dog. I explained in as few words as possible because I felt the situation was dire. We stepped out into the yard together to call his dog in. He was out in the grass barking rather viciously at someone or something out of sight. The dog was barely visible because it was so dark out. We went together to grab the dog by the collar, and as we got hold of him, we saw someone in the bushes run away into the patch of trees that separated our house from the next house. It was like a jump scare moment in a horror movie. That dark figure I saw run into the trees had to be the stalker pretending to be me on Instagram. I just knew it. We brought the dog inside and locked the door. You may ask, why didn't we let the dog chase down whoever it was? That's because Corey's dog is all bark, no bite. He wouldn't ever harm a fly. At some point in the middle of the night, the dog started barking again downstairs by the front door. This was very unusual behavior, so Corey and I both checked out the windows and then stepped outside. It was the most scared I had ever felt in my life, standing on the front porch, looking out into the dark night, knowing someone was out there probably watching us. We went back inside, and for the rest of the night, silence. I think whoever had my phone turned it off or smashed it after I put it in lost mode to avoid it being tracked any further. I say this because it would no longer update the location. I checked everywhere by the last known location, but it didn't turn up. After DMing that account that I knew who they were and was filing a report to the police, the account disappeared only a few minutes later. I don't think it was deactivated. I think it was completely deleted. My threat seemed to work. Like I said, this was recently though, and I'm still staying very aware of my surroundings.
If you're looking into creating a YouTube channel of your own, but have no idea where to even start as far as learning video editing, then Skillshare may be the answer to your problem. Skillshare is an online learning community for people who want to learn pretty much any skill they want from the thousands of available educational video classes. The courses are available through subscription and are taught by industry leaders and working professionals. Some of the different class types include film and video editing, photography, music, animation, and web development. So if you aspire to be a YouTuber, or maybe you want to create your own website, but don't feel you have the skills necessary to get started doing what you're interested in, you'll undoubtedly be able to learn in a fun and effective manner through Skillshare. On top of this, Skillshare is ad-free, so you can stay in the zone and avoid distracting commercials while you're picking up new skills. New classes are added each week, so there's never a shortage of new things to learn. So click the link in the description to join, and if you're one of the first 1,000 people to join using this link, you'll get a 1-month free trial for Skillshare.
I was a new student to Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania. Going into my junior year of high school, not knowing anyone was really rough. Everyone obviously had their friend group sorted out by then. The worst part was lunchtime, though. My school wouldn't let juniors leave for lunch, only seniors, so I had to eat in the cafeteria. I was dreading it because I knew I'd have no one to sit with, and I didn't want to force myself into a random table. When lunchtime finally came, however, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray of food looking for a place to sit. Every single table was taken. I didn't even have the option of sitting alone. But there was one table in the corner of the cafeteria with only 2 kids sitting at it. That was the least intimidating spot to sit, so I walked over and asked if I could sit there. They both looked at each other, and one of them said yeah. I noticed upon sitting down that the 2 were identical twins. They looked like they were partially of Hispanic heritage, but they didn't have accents. They honestly seemed alright. They introduced themselves as Antonio and Bruno, and they had a conversation with me. They invited me to hang out with them after school, and honestly I figured why not? I had to start off somewhere as far as making friends. I got their numbers, and after school I went home to drop off all my stuff. Shortly after, I got a text from Bruno, telling me he and his brother were planning on hanging out. He told me to meet them around 9 that night at the nearby cemetery that was like a 10-minute walk from my house. He said there was a cool hangout spot near there. Plus, the first day of school was on a Friday, so we had off the next day. I had nothing to do, so I said, yeah, I'm down. When the time came, Bruno texted me one more time asking if I was still coming. I said, yeah, I'm gonna leave in a few, and confirmed we were meeting on the road by the cemetery. He said yeah, so I began my walk in the dark to the cemetery. The longer I walked, the more I thought about my whole move and being the new kid in high school, and thinking about the fact that I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to hang out with 2 kids I just met. But anyway, I got to the little road next to the cemetery and asked Bruno where they were. He started typing right away, and he said they were in the woods hanging by a small lake that they wanted to show me. Then he promptly sent his location. So I made my way into the woods, pushing branches out of my way, using my tiny phone flashlight as my only light. I started calling for Bruno and Antonio as I felt like I was close enough, according to the location he sent me at least. Suddenly I heard footsteps, so I stopped. Definitely footsteps approaching me, but they were very low and slow. I called out that they better not be trying to scare me. When they weren't answering me though, I decided this was stupid. I turned and started walking back towards the road. But those footsteps I mentioned earlier, they turned from quiet and slow to fast, and before I could even react, someone had their nails digging into my neck, effectively choking me. I heard a familiar voice screaming, "Grab him, grab him." I managed to break free from this sort of chokehold and sprinted towards the road. I know they followed me until the tree line by the road. I was faster than them, and I could run for miles. And that's what I did. I ran straight home and told my parents. They considered calling the cops, but I thought it would be better to get pictures of the nail marks on my neck and report it to the school the next day. That's what we did, and with the help of the text that I got from Bruno, I was able to get the 2 students expelled. My parents made me block both their numbers. I didn't exactly argue with that, though. My parents wanted me to confirm that these kids didn't know where we lived, and I told them simply, not as far as I know. So anyway, one night about a week later, I woke up to my room feeling really cold. I heard the sound of wind blowing into my room, and I looked at the window to see it was slid completely open. I wondered if my mom came in to open it, but that would make absolutely no sense. It was like 50 degrees out that night. I walked over to it and looked down below. A few feet below my bedroom window, there's a part of the exterior of my house that comes outward, creating a sort of ledge underneath my window that my father always told me to jump onto in case of a fire. I shut my window and walked over to my parents' bedroom. I gently knocked and opened the door, and my mom groggily asked what. I had to ask her if she opened my window. She sat up saying, "No, why?" I told her in a louder, more concerned voice now that my window was opened all the way by somebody. She started shaking my dad to wake him up and go check my room with me. But when he woke up, he told me to grow up and go back to sleep. I left my parents' door open as I walked back down the hall to my room. Then, I picked up on something that I'm surprised I picked up on. My door. It seemed to be half shut now, as opposed to completely open when I left. I pushed the door open just a little bit so I could get a look through the crack and see if, someone was behind the door. Even though I had the thought of the possibility, I never could have actually expected to see it. There was someone hiding behind my door. I screamed for my dad like a little girl. I screamed so loud I'm sure it could be heard 3 doors down. Then my door suddenly slammed shut, just as my dad came rushing out of his room over to me. I screamed, "There's people in my room," so he barged into the room and turned the light on. At that moment, we saw the leg of a person jumping out my window. My dad ran to the window, then downstairs and out the front door to attempt to chase them down, but he came back a few minutes later out of breath, saying he didn't see anyone. Full of energy and fear, I swore it had to be those twins that I got expelled. My dad called the police, and I had to talk to them when they arrived, explaining the whole story back to the incident in the woods. My father backed up my story, but without proof of who entered, they said there wasn't anything they could do. They merely ordered us to lock the doors and consider installing cameras outside. As positive I am that it was either one of or both of those twins in my room, after getting through a solid couple months of sleeping in fear, nothing to this nature ever happened again. Looking back now, I don't know why I was so willing to meet these kids in the woods at night. I should have realized in the cafeteria that day that they looked like trouble, and I should have stayed away.
Freshman year of high school, 2007. Gym class, last period. We had a substitute gym teacher on one of the stormiest days of the year. He was an older man, not a senior citizen, but gray, maybe 55 to 60. He took attendance, and when he passed me, he did a double take at me, which I found a bit uncomfortable. Not to float my own boat, but I always understood I looked older and really good for a freshman in high school. The sub told us to get into our volleyball teams, and he disappeared into the hall by the locker rooms for a while. 40 minutes went by and the period was over. It was time for us to get changed and go home. I got into the locker room, but for some reason, my locker wasn't opening. I tried my usual combination over and over and over. It wouldn't click open though. I had to go to the sub and let him know to ask for my combination again. I figured maybe the combo just slipped from my mind for some reason. The sub told me to give him a few minutes and he'd get the list of locker combos. I waited outside the office, and out he finally came with a book in his hands, open to a specific page. He walked into the girls' locker room with me, which I didn't expect him to do. The locker room was basically empty now, with one girl finishing up changing. We walked over to my locker and tried the combination written down on the paper. It didn't work no matter how many times he tried it. Each time he tried it and failed, he would look at me and laugh. I would force myself to laugh along to be polite, but it started getting weird. He put his hand on my shoulder as he said, "We'll figure this out." He tried the combination again, with his hand still on my shoulder, and it didn't work again. I felt his hand slowly started inching down from my shoulder to my lower back. I pushed myself away and grabbed my bag, saying, "It's okay, I'm late for my bus." He tried a combo in the locker one more time, and it opened. He smiled and walked away. I waited till I heard the locker room door shut. Then I proceeded to getting changed quickly. Then suddenly the room went dark. I finished pulling up my pants and shut my locker in the dark. I threw on my backpack and started walking to the back exit of the locker room, which led outside. I feared that the sub would be waiting right by the door for me. I got predatory vibes from him. When I got to the end of that specific aisle of lockers I was in the intersection of 2 rows. I'd have to turn down left to get to the exit door, but still.
Naturally, I had to look right to make sure that it was clear. There was a little light seeping in from one single rectangular window that sat under the ceiling. It was enough. Enough for me to see him peeking at me from around the wall of lockers. So that's when I ran for the exit door. He came over behind me saying, wait, it's not what it looks like. I ran outside into the rain off the campus of the high school and walked the rest of the way home, giving me time to reflect on what happened. By the time I got home, soaking wet, it came to me that he most likely changed my locker combination somehow as a way of getting alone with me in the locker room. As for what he could have possibly been planning to do when he cut the lights, I never wanted to imagine. Honestly, I was too emotionally scared and quite frankly embarrassed to tell anyone about it, not even my parents or friends. It was something I just kept to myself all these years, because truthfully, I just don't feel comfortable telling people. When I was in high school, I was in the band. At my school, band was basically an easy A. It was either that, orchestra, or chorus, so I went with band. Anyhow, our band teacher, Mr. Nicholson, had the grading system set up so that as long as you attended class and went to your weekly lessons, you got an A. Sadly, towards the end of one quarter, I was missing 2 lessons. Because of that, my grade was a B. I went to him after class to ask if I could make up the lessons, and even though he seemed reluctant, he said he would let me come in during a lunch period and practice in one of the downstairs storage rooms to get credit for a lesson. I was more than happy with that, because realistically, I would probably just play games on my phone anyway instead of actually practicing. I arrived to the music room during my lunch period the next day, so I took my saxophone and headed down the stairs outside the music room towards the basement area for the music department. It was always kind of creepy down there, because absolutely no one besides the music teachers would go down there usually, and the lights were kind of shitty. I'd only been down there a couple times before that day. But anyway, I walked down the hallway, and on either side were a bunch of doors that led into small, maybe 7 by 7 feet rooms. All of these rooms were used for storing things like chairs, music stands, spare instruments, Christmas decorations, and whatever. I stepped into one of the rooms and shut the door. I set up my music on one of the stands in the room, just in case Mr. Nicholson were to come down to check on me. But really, I didn't plan on actually playing. I started playing games on my phone, and then flick. Darkness. Like, as dark as it could get. Minus my phone screen. I looked over to the light switch to the room just instinctively, flicked it up and down a few times, but that did nothing. I stumbled as I got up from the seat to open the door, to more darkness. I held my phone out in front of me to light up this little hallway, even if it was just barely. I think I had like an iPhone 3 or something. Those old ones didn't have flashlights. But anyway, that little light from my phone was enough to see one of the doors open near the end of the hall, and I heard something being dragged in that room, like one of the big plastic containers. There was also manic breathing, followed by animal-like grunting. Then I saw a big plastic container being pushed out of that room into the hallway. As I saw this, I turned off my phone screen and went back into the room I was just in. I shut the door so quietly. I don't know what exactly I was thinking in that moment that I decided to hide, but I think the strange sounds I was hearing from this person, mixed with a random blackout, made me wary of staying in that hallway. Whoever that was blocking the stairs though, and of course I got no reception down in that little basement area. All I felt comfortable doing was sitting in that room and waiting for the lights to hopefully turn back on. But the lights seemed like they were never going to turn back on. So I decided I would try and get back upstairs again. I quietly opened the door with my phone in front of me for light. Then I stepped into the hall. I inched up a little closer to the stairs, then I heard something again. I quickly crept into the next closest room with the door open and shut it. I still didn't know what I was hiding from. Could it have been a staff member or janitor? At that point, the only reason I had of thinking it wasn't was because they only appeared down there after the lights turned off. I stood in that room in complete darkness, only listening and waiting for another sound from outside. But you know how when you're in a room with someone, even if you don't necessarily hear them, you can kind of just sense their presence? That's suddenly the feeling I got standing in that pitch black room. I lifted my shaking hand up and pressed the home button on my phone to turn on the screen, just for half a second. That was enough to see someone standing in the corner of this little storage room, 3 feet away from me. I pretended I didn't see anything, but it was too late. Shh, is what I heard, breaking the silence. Then, a hand patted my shoulder twice and started squeezing it. I basically dove for the doorknob, struggling to find it at first, but pulling the door open when I did. The man in the room with me tried pushing the door shut after I opened it, but I was already out. I ran up the stairs and out the door to the main level of the music hall, where the lights were still on. I ran to Mr. Nicholson to tell him, out of breath. He called security to check the basement section of the music hall, but security came back upstairs and said, besides a bunch of music equipment moved around, there wasn't anyone down there. The rest of the period, Mr. Nicholson canceled his flute lesson, and I sat there in the room with him and 5 flute players, explaining the whole story in detail. Without cameras in the music hall, there was no way of catching whoever went down there and killed the power for the basement. It seemed that he was trying to steal expensive music equipment. That, or God knows what else. The next day, I was called into the dean's office to give my story of what happened, and the rest is history. One night, my friends and I hatched a genius plan. We'd sneak into the high school basement through one of the windows that was broken and never fixed. The thing about this window, you'd have to hop a short metal gate surrounding an outside staircase leading to the basement. Not that it would effectively stop anyone, but it added that extra barrier that makes you feel like you're really doing something devious when you crossed over it. We made sure there weren't any security cars anywhere nearby and hopped the gate. Crawling in through the window proved difficult, considering we had to boost ourselves up, then crawl through an insanely skinny opening. But once we were in, we were in. We kind of dispersed from each other to explore different areas. One thing was for sure, the basement of the school was a mess, and anything but interesting. There was little light. One small white light was on in a far corner, and the exit sign light actually produced more light than you'd think. I was looking around when I saw one of my friends in front of me. He whispered, "Let's go upstairs." So I followed him upstairs, and he opened the door up to the main hallway of the school. Everything was dark. I always thought there were at least some lights left on in the school at night. But no, not a single light was on. And all that really stood out as far as the eye could see were the various exit signs glowing red. I followed my friend down the hall and remembered saying, "Dude, this is really creepy." And he replied back, "Shh." But I realized he was right. Who knew if somebody else could be in the building besides my friends and I? Little did I know just yet. I followed my friend to the bathroom, and he went into one of the stalls. I whispered, "Hurry up." I waited for a while. Then my phone started to ring. I picked up, and it was one of my friends, Chris. He asked, "Where the hell did you go?" I said I'm upstairs with either Roland or Brandon. He said, "What do you mean? They're with me." And right after, both Brendan and Roland said hi, apparently on speakerphone. I stuttered the word "I," stopped, trying to think straight. Then, there was a laughing coming from in the stall. Not the laugh of any of my friends. I looked up at the stall. There was someone looking over it at me, probably standing on the toilet. I screamed "holy shit" over and over into the phone as I left the bathroom. Shortly after I was out, I heard the stall door slam shut. I tried to run back to the basement in the dark, but it wasn't too easy to find in the dark. Luckily, I managed to find it, so I started to scream their names as I ran down the stairs. I screamed, "Go, go," when they answered, and we one by one jumped off some kind of bucket onto the window ledge and crawled back outside. I was the first one out, though, afraid that person from the bathroom was following. When we were all outside, I explained to them, out of breath, while also laughing now that I felt safe with all of them next to me. I guess we were loud or something, though, because as we all just started looking around at the whole school building and all the classroom windows, in one of the downstairs windows was someone with their hands pressed up on the glass. We could only see maybe half their face. I said, "That's gotta be him," as Roland ushered us to get the hell out of there. We ran until we were off the premises of the school, and that was that. We came up with a lot of possible explanations, but none of them really made sense. Obviously, we never did anything like that again, though.
It was a rainy night, and I was driving home from my shift at the late night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work. I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day, but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There's the occasional little parking lot with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. And by nothingness, I mean forest, obviously. I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain, with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman, who appeared to be in her mid-50s maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5'11" or 6 foot, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I am. I asked where she's heading, and she said just up the road to town. She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet. But I like to think of myself as a good person, and I couldn't in good conscience leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man, on the other hand, would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed as I looked at her while talking to her, she was missing a few teeth. Very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she were homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any sense temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly, undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump. Might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week. She said no thanks, honey. So I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny. She was gone. She must have ran off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost, helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV, and I was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a two-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked. Then the two doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in out of the rain and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts. A lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier, and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I was more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up feeling drowsy, feeling really thirsty too. I reached over the table next to my bed for my water, and then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face. And now, whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream. I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this. No footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him of what I just saw, and he said, "Trish, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake, and I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space. There was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinate it, but still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat. And that's when I noticed the damp, yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back, and my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything. I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that, and so after that month, I found a new place to live. This happened a few months ago, and I don't know why I agreed, but I decided to go with my friend Michael to a house party he was attending during our first year of high school. Even though I wasn't even invited, Michael was able to pull some strings and I accepted the invitation. Knowing that I wouldn't be able to drive, I made the choice to go with Michael. When we arrived at the home late at night, Michael told me to leave my phone in the car. He explained that maybe I could lose it or someone I don't know could try and take it from me while I'm not looking. At first, I was confused. I simply nodded, and we got out of the car. I went with Michael into the home or backyard where the party was taking place. I glanced around the backyard and saw people engaging in various activities such as smoking, drinking, and possibly even doing drugs in small groups. Michael had encouraged me to go mingle and say hello to a few people. After a few hours, I realized I had way too much to drink because my vision was completely foggy. After getting closer to the house, I leaned against the wall to support myself. As I did so, I noticed the time on my watch indicated that it was either midnight or 1 in the morning. I knew it was time to leave, so I set out to find Michael, and despite my overwhelming need to collapse, I scanned the yard for him, but I was unable to locate him or see him. When I asked a few others if they'd seen Michael, they all said they had not. I decided to call Mike to find out where he was. So I reached inside my pocket to feel for my phone, but it wasn't there, and I cursed myself in the back of my mind because I realized that I had left my phone in Michael's car. It disappeared with him. I realized there was only one way to get home, which was walking, because I remembered my house wasn't too far from this house, but the night was chilly because it was fall. I thought about just asking someone else to take me home, but I didn't know anyone else that could help. So I stuck with my idea of walking home in the darkness by myself. I then got to the road and started stumbling down the street, and I knew I had too many drinks because I felt lightheaded and dizzy. A few minutes later, I made it to the main area of the street and kept walking. I lazily started thinking about a bunch of different things, like why did Michael decide to leave me alone at the party? Or why I decided to listen to Michael's idiotic idea of leaving my phone in his car so I couldn't call him or anyone else. I started cursing myself for being so careless with my drinking and even getting drunk, knowing I shouldn't have done that. I stopped walking on the side of the road because I was getting tired, and I crossed my arms over my chest tightly to keep myself warm. Then I remembered something I could do, which was hitchhiking, and I then held out my arm and stuck out my thumb, hoping someone else could see me. I watched as a couple cars drove past me. They wouldn't stop, and as minutes ticked by, I started feeling uneasy, thinking I would have to start walking again. It was past 1 in the morning, and there were a few cars driving past me, but no one was stopping because they either didn't notice me or didn't care. I hesitated and thought about walking home again, but I realized that, in my drunken state, it would be too daunting. I was still holding out my thumb when a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me, and I smiled as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, and an older-looking man with a beard asked me if I needed a ride. I told him yes, and then told him where my house was before getting into the truck, feeling grateful for the ride. As we started driving down the road, the man started trying to make small talk with me, asking what happened to me. However, I was too disoriented to have an actual conversation with him, and the only things I could manage to say were low mumbles or just murmurs and groans. As we turned the corner to my street away from the party, I started feeling uneasy. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was strange about this man. Suddenly, we drove past my house, and I told the man that we had just driven past it, and I felt my gut telling me to get out, but I couldn't because I was too drunk to move. I was about to tell the man to let me out before we got too far away from my house, when suddenly the man turned to me, and I noticed he had a sinister look on his face. "You know you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking because you'd make a very easy target," the man said, smirking darkly. The man reached over and started rubbing my leg, and I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I knew it probably wasn't anything good. But before he could do anything else to me, we both heard a loud siren behind the car, and then a flashing red and blue light flooded the night. I realized it was the police, and I jumped for joy inside. The man panicked and stopped, unlocking the doors, which allowed me to jump out of the car. I ran as fast as I could, and the police officer rushed over to me, and I told him the entire story about what happened to me. Unfortunately, nothing illegal happened per se at that point. The police officer told me that he was looking for someone in a gray truck who had apparently stolen something from a store. I'm not sure if it was the man who picked me up or someone else, but I was just glad the police officer stopped the car.
A cop gave me a ride home, and I decided from there on I wouldn't get so drunk that I couldn't think straight.
I now know the importance of being responsible and staying aware of my surroundings, even when having a good time.
I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties still. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Deanna and Kayla wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then I'd sometimes be known to still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that, just 4 friends renting a house together. I believe it was a Kappa Sigma party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house, and then we called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I just barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a Kappa party besides that night. It's weird, I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house. And then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road in a daze. My head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees, like a wooded area. Apart from the university, there wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone, and I had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my crossbody bag. I had absolutely nothing on me. I started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping. Nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road, closer to the light posts. I was starting to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road.
I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time though, at least 15 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The car slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car, and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right, I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He of course asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible, not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. The guy looked at me like I was a moron. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was like 35. He wasn't the best looking guy. He had a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his house. As he drove, he put the address in, and then I heard him say under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 20 minutes. That sounded about right, since the frat house was about 20 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly. I'd get dropped off at the house where Kayla and Deanna would be waiting for me with my belongings, but nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time. He was asking basic questions at first. His soft voice was almost, in a weird way, off-putting. Like, why was he talking in an almost whisper in the car? We drove on and on for what seemed like over 20 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned, and so I asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir," and he went, "Hmm?" And I repeated my question. He said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he said, "What color underwear are you wearing?" as he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing my knee. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me. I just want to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park, and he was about to lean over towards me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Force Ones, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car when I could no longer see its headlights. I heard the man for the first time raising his voice, and he yelled into the woods, "Where you at? I just want to lick your pussy." I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing, but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure that it was a different car before jumping out and waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, this guy a little older. I sat in the back seat this time. I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke, apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake, waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy who I was with claimed he wasn't the one to leave with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone, but that leaves no explanation how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night, and I never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. Out of the dark forest, I was hitchhiking from Leipzig, Germany to Paris. He was a French man, a A somewhat dirty and unshaven driver, small and shabby. He agreed to give me a ride in his car, a ride with him to Paris, where I needed to pick up my paintings from an exhibition I had there. It was October. I was 29 years old, and he seemed about the same age. He spoke broken English. I spoke no French at all. I really didn't have a clue who this guy was. The day was mild, sunny, and blue. It was a warm and comfortable French day, a great day to hitchhike. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I met him at a gas station somewhere in France. I hopped into his little old car, happy to have scored a ride. We drove off to Paris on the main highway. After some small talk, mainly about where I'm from, he reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out what looked like a bunch of passports. They were passports. He handed me all four. The first pretty girl was his girlfriend who died falling off the back of his motorcycle, he said. The second, his girlfriend who died in a car crash, he told me. The third girlfriend died from a brain tumor, and the fourth fell off of a horse. He said, "I'm such an unlucky man." I agreed he was unlucky. The uneasiness started then, and only grew as the miles rolled on. He was in possession of 4 young women's passports. Soon after showing me the passports, the man said he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris. It wasn't really a question to me. Excellent, I thought. Get me out of here ASAP. I assumed we would cut through some charming French villages on secondary roads, past houses and farms. But no. Instead, we turned off onto an implausible dirt road off the main highway. Uh-oh, I thought. Not good. But I kept silent. Why we keep quiet is a mystery, perhaps because of our dumb manners. At first, the road was out in the open, through a field. We rolled over the typically vivid green French hillside until we finally reached the oncoming heavy woods. The road narrowed. It grew instantly darker as we entered the forest road and drove in. The interior of the forest was creepy. The woods looked like the perfect place to hide something. I still found the woods beautiful and dreadful. It was at this point that my French driver shouted in broken English, "I don't want to speak English anymore." This was definitely not a request. Then silence. Uncomfortable silence in the darkening forest. I started to feel a small trickle of adrenaline in my body. My fight or flight instinct was warming up. Communication had now officially ended. Just silence. I pondered this because I knew I would surely have questions as we would get deeper and deeper into the thickening woods. I knew, though, that I wouldn't ask anything. Nothing. It was now 5 p.m. and the sun was fading fast. The woods grew darker. The driver seemed so tense, and I could tell he was in deep thought. I noticed his lips moving almost imperceptibly. It was rigid, snake-like. I myself had moved my hand to the car door handle, a movement I'm sure could not have been missed. The car was slowing down. I did not say a word. Was I going to die now? Did he have a gun? I looked. All these questions ran through my head. My life was now surreal. This was not my plan. Maybe I communicated with my captor in some secret way. Maybe I gave off some kind of male pheromones perceptible only to men facing off. I possessed my own rage issues, and I was not going down without a fight. That I knew. There would be no begging or cries of mercy from me. Not to this fucker. I also had my own secret storeroom of crazy. I was big and strong at that time. Road tough through my travels, and there's no substitute for my nothing to lose stare. That is all I gave him. Something very primitive transpired between us then, I think. Rather quickly, in a matter of seconds. It's a sort of inner calculus as to whether one can overcome, stop, or kill the other guy or not, and all its peripheral considerations, not the least blood, gore, strength, and alas, dying. I don't think these calculations are the same when the victim is small and scared, begging and weak. I think between those two uneven people it just becomes bloodlust, power, panic, scratching, and doom. 5:12 p.m. The car was now moving really slow. I entered a very strange and new place in myself. I was transformed with very little preparation, transformed into a potential killer myself. Maybe my chauffeur could read my mind or my body language or sense my intent or see my hand on his dirty door handle. It was the moment of truth. And then we suddenly started to speed up. Thank God, out of those woods. Odd how these memories have come back to me as I write this. Some memories I'm not certain of, like, did he say he had to hit one girlfriend with a shovel because she attacked him and would not be quiet and leave him in peace? Did he really explain the two backpacks on the back seat? Did I not hear that on purpose? Did I later imagine those words? Did I see more passports in his glove box than the four he pulled out? Why didn't I say stop the car after the passport show? The road began to widen, and we emerged out of the dark forest into the setting sun, dark red and orange in the sky. I could hear and then see the highway now. I saw tiny houses across the highway. I had no idea where exactly I was. The Frenchman asked me if I wanted to spend the night at his house. We could eat dinner together. A quick film of his filthy torture chamber basement ran through my head. I politely said no, my first words spoken since the order not to speak English. I sincerely think that had I broken that command and blabbered something in the woods, my story might have had a different ending. It all came down to silence. I can be silent. Sometimes one needs to be, to contemplate the next move. Maybe one of the faces in the passports may not have been able to spring over her nature and started to talk or beg with fear. Would that have fed the killer's darkness, his evil? Who really knows? I got out at the side of the highway, and with night settling in, I watched him drive away. I never went to the police because I didn't speak French, and I thought maybe my imagination was just too damn active. I yelled something into the night sky, just wondering what the hell just happened. It was fully dark now. I was now exhausted after that little adventure, and I soon fell asleep on the side of the highway. The next morning, I was worried what the new day would bring. I looked at my hands. Am I still alive? Jump ahead 20 years, and I'm teaching a German business student English in a cafe on a boulevard in Leipzig, Germany. For whatever reason, we discuss this topic, hitchhiking, and I tell him my story. My student promptly whips out his smartphone and Googles French serial killers. Then he shows me pictures. There he was. I was shown a photo of serial killer Patrice Allegre. It was him all those years ago, me and him on that strange ride. I had never forgotten his face. At that time, 1990, there was a reported serial killer leaving bodies of girls on the French roadsides and highways. He was in the midst of his killing hobby back then. I had heard about a killer on the loose. My French girlfriend told me to be careful hitchhiking back then. I've often wondered if the murdered women and other men may have been buried in those woods we passed through slowly. I now wish I had gone to the police, and have since subsequently tried. He's in jail, and they're not interested. Maybe I could have helped stop more murders back then. That's heavy on my soul, and since then, I felt the dark light in my body. Maybe the souls of the girls escaped with me, desperate to get out of the forest.
I had spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's sort of an all-day drive. On my last day in Austin, my old friend Tom had commented on my Instagram story asking when I leave, and I said today. He told me he lived an hour outside of Austin, which was actually in the direction home for me. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it would be nice to catch up. He said I should stop by, and I said sure, why not? I set my GPS for Tom's address, and it said about an hour-and-a-half drive. Tom and I had been friends back in high school, but lost touch after graduation. We followed each other on social media, but hadn't really spoken in years. When I pulled up, I noticed his house was a little old-fashioned. It wasn't run down or anything, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my steps, and when he opened the door, I caught the scent of old wood and something rustic, like an old cabin in the woods. Tom was of course very welcoming, giving me a big hug and pulling me inside. Some friendships stay just as pure no matter how much time passes. The inside of the house was just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been around since the 70s, and every step I took on the hardwood floors let out a small creak. It felt kind of Texas, I guess. It was kind of charming in a way, like stepping back in time. We sat down in his living room, catching up on life, drinking whiskey. It was like 5 p.m. by this point. One drink turned into two into three, and before I knew it, I was pretty drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier. Hours passed like minutes, honestly. We were having such a good time catching up that eventually he dropped the question I knew he'd ask.
"Hey man, you got a long drive back. Why don't you crash here for the night?" he offered. I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to be on the road. I said, "Yeah, good idea," and asked if I'd take the couch we were on. And then he said, "Nah, I got a spare room. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch." That was good enough for me. We ate some Chinese food that we had delivered, and after a while, he led me down a short hallway to the spare bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the inside of the room because I was hammered. We both were. But I remember the air in the room was still, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I barely had time to register my surroundings before I collapsed onto the bed, completely exhausted and drunk. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and the room was dark, except for a little bit of moonlight sneaking in through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, on the closet door, there was something hanging. At first, it looked like a long black trench coat on a coat rack, but as my eyes adjusted, the shape of it felt wrong. It had a broad upper portion, almost like shoulders, and the way it hung made it look less like fabric and more like a silhouette. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into the bed, but I had been drunk. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. It was just a coat, nothing more, but I couldn't help myself. I peeked again. Still there. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and forced myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was out there before I woke up again. It wasn't just discomfort that pulled me from sleep. It was sound. A slow, soft creaking, like someone stepping carefully on an old wooden floor. My eyes shot open. The room was dimly lit now, dawn creeping through the blinds. I turned my head toward the corner, and my stomach dropped. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast that my head spun. My body was buzzing with a sickening mix of fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, my heart thudding against my ribs. There was nothing in the corner, just an empty closet door. I threw the covers off and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring, completely unaware of the panic storming through me. I shook him awake, which took a lot of effort considering he was out from all that alcohol. He finally woke up very confused, rubbing his eyes. "The coat," I said breathlessly. "The one on the coat rack in the spare room." He squinted at me, confused. "What coat?" he said. "The black trench coat, the one that was hanging on the closet door. It looked like a person almost." Tom sat up, looking more awake now. "I don't own a trench coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room," he said. I stared at him, waiting for him to say he was messing with me, that this was some kind of joke, but his expression stayed serious. "Come look," I said. He sighed, but got up and followed me back to the spare bedroom. I pointed to the exact spot. "It was right there," I said. Tom scratched his head. He asked me if I was sure I wasn't just dreaming, but I said I know what I saw. I insisted, with my voice shaking slightly. "I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again and it was gone," I said. We stood in the room for a few moments, both of us feeling the same eerie silence pressing in on us. Tom finally exhaled and shook his head, agreeing we should check the house just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no weird coats hanging anywhere, nothing that could explain what I saw. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me that maybe I had been in some kind of half-dream state, seeing things that weren't there. I wanted to believe that, really. I didn't want to think about the alternative. As soon as the sun was fully up, I grabbed my stuff, said goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him alone after that. The whole drive back to Louisiana, my mind kept circling back to that moment, waking up to that coat-like figure staring at me from the corner, the way it was just gone in the morning. Maybe Tom played a cruel prank on me, but to this day he's never admitted to anything, so I doubt that. Or maybe, just maybe, there had been someone in that house watching me sleep, and they decided to leave before the morning came. This happened to me when I was 18 years old. I was on a trip with my parents and a friend of mine, whom we can call Anna. This story takes place in Sweden